Welcome to the Alpha and the Fox, a forbidden shifter romance, where fate is messy, the sparks are wild, and the full moon brings more than fur and fangs. There's snark, steam, and a mate bond neither of them asked for, but can't escape. Buckle up, pack. From haunted hearts to ancient curses, you'll find stories here that pull you in and don't let go. If you're into tales that twist the real and the unreal, you're in the right place. Nyxen Audiobooks. Hit that subscribe button, and let's dive in. The bell clanged through Greybridge House, brittle and shrill, echoing in the metal pipes that snaked across the low, stained ceiling. It was the sound of endings, but to Dasha, it was merely a change of scene, a new set of variables to calculate. The orphanage hall smelled of old, damp wood, and decades of desperation, a stale aroma that clung to the threadbare carpets and the peeling paint of the walls. Dust motes danced in the sparse slivers of light that struggled through the grimy, tall windows, making the air hazy and tired. A cold draught, perpetual in Greybridge House, snaked around Dasha's ankles, a familiar chill. Dasha tied her braid tighter, the familiar tug, a small anchor. She smoothed her plain grey sweater, ensuring every fold was unremarkable. She'd learned long ago how to dull herself. Hair pulled back, eyes lowered, clothes without shape or colour. Her beauty lived folded away, hidden behind glass, a secret she guarded fiercely. The only thing she couldn't mute were her eyes, silver, bright as moonlight on ice. She blinked often to soften them, to make them seem less knowing. Her kitsune mind ticked and counted as she filed into the hall, joining the solemn lineup, 12 of them in total, each one exactly 18, the age when the wolves came to choose. 2 guards stood at the massive oak doors, their new leather boots creaking faintly with every subtle shift of weight. 3 cracked floorboards near the front squealed like trapped mice when stepped on. Foxes survived by numbers and details, nothing escaped her tally. She noted the anxious, shallow breaths of the orphans around her, the low, almost imperceptible hum of their whispered anxieties that dissipated like wisps of smoke in the heavy air. What if they don't pick anyone? What if they pick me? Their fear was a scent in the air, one that was easy for her to mask her true nature against. Matron Pell stood at the front, her rosary beads clacking against her severe skirt, the sound sharp and brittle like the bell. Back straight, heads high. Remember, wolves value strength. Her voice was a whip, but Dasha saw the telltale tightness around the matron's thin mouth, the way her grip on the rosary whitened her knuckles. Even the matron was on edge. Dasha inhaled carefully, a slow, controlled breath that tasted faintly of the ash and dried sage she'd rubbed into her wrists and neck. The herbs clung to her, a perfected illusion, years in the making. Wolves trusted their noses. That trust made them easy to fool. She could feel the steady beat of her pulse against her ribs, a quiet thrum that anchored her, allowing her breath to remain even, disguising the subtle, wild thrum of her true fox scent underneath. The deep rumble of engines rolled into the cobbled courtyard. 2 black SUVs, growling like beasts, hungry for something precious. A collective shudder went through the line of children. They shifted nervously, exchanging quick, wide-eyed glances, their whispers escalating to a frantic murmur before Matron Pell's sharp hiss silenced them. The first Alpha through the door seemed to fill the room with light. Lean and bright-eyed, Andre moved with an easy confidence, his presence stretching taller than his frame. His laughter boomed as he clasped the matron's hands as though she were family. "Matron Pell, still keeping order, I see. You've got them looking quite sharp today." The children's shoulders eased at his warmth, some even daring a faint smile. Andre was a winter fire, inviting and comforting. Behind him came Talon. The air in the hall cooled perceptibly the moment he crossed the threshold, as if a window had been flung open to a blizzard. He did not smile, did not shake hands. His eyes, the colour of flint, swept the hall, not warming the room but dissecting it with military precision. Counting exits, noting weaknesses in the crumbling plaster. Assessing the fearful children. His presence pressed on the room, heavy as stone, solid and unyielding. The matron's voice faltered noticeably when she greeted him, her rosary beads clattering faster, a frantic rhythm against her skirt. Alpha Andre, Alpha Talon. Welcome, she managed, her gaze darting between the two men, a flicker of genuine fear passing over her tired face when Talon's gaze paused briefly on her. Andre, ever the affable one, grinned at the line of orphans. Let's hear from them. Names, talents, ambitions. We'll see where they belong. He started down the line, his geniality softening even the shyest children. He laughed when Grigori, a gangly boy with hopeful eyes, admitted to carpentry and praised Minna for her baking, her plump cheeks flushing with pride. The younger children, peering from the dormitory windows above, smiled back at him, drawn to his easy charm. Talon stayed back, silent, arms folded across his chest. He watched, not with curiosity or warmth, but with clinical calculation. Every twitch, every hesitant shift of weight, every averted gaze, he absorbed it all. Wolves trusted instinct. Dasha observed, trusted observation, as she did. A deep, cold thrill went through her. This alpha didn't waste words. He catalogued, just as she did. Dangerous. When Andre's cheerful voice reached her, his smile broadened. And you? Name? Dasha, she said quietly, her voice smooth, without inflection. What do you do best? She raised her silver eyes just enough, letting them catch his for a heartbeat, a calculated flicker of light. Then, with the faintest curve of something like wit in her voice, barely perceptible, I notice things. Andre chuckled warmly, a booming sound that startled a flock of pigeons outside the window. A watcher! Every pack needs eyes! But it wasn't Andre who mattered. Talon had stepped closer, his shadow stretched across her worn boots, a long, dark spear. The air around them crackled with an unspoken challenge. His gaze locked on her eyes, sharp and unwavering as a blade, cutting through her carefully constructed calm. You watch, he said, his voice low, a gravelly whisper that seemed to accuse her very essence. Dasha inclined her head, her silver eyes half-lidded, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her internal fox mind roared, a silent, delighted challenge to his predatory calm. Someone has to. A ripple went through the orphans, a sharp, collective intake of breath, hushed whispers that died instantly under the matron's frantic hisses. Boldness was dangerous in Greybridge House. Talon's mouth twitched, a precise movement that was not quite a smile, but something more intriguing. Then tell me, Dasha, what have you seen? Dasha let silence linger, a strategic pause. A fox never rushes into a snare, no matter how tempting the bait. When she spoke, her words came soft, almost mild, like idle musings, though everyone cut clean, each observation a perfectly placed arrow. The guards at the gate have new boots. They creak still, so they are less sure of the stone. The matron nearest you wrings her hands before you speak, which means she fears your silence more than your words. And your friend, her eyes flicked, quick as lightning, toward Andre, a flash of silver. He speaks too kindly. It makes the children lean toward him, though they do not trust it to last. Andre chuckled under his breath, startled. She's sharper than she looks. Talon didn't chuckle. His gaze never left her, cold and steady, a hunter's focus. And me? He prompted, his voice a quiet challenge. For the first time, her silver eyes lifted, fully, pinning him with quiet, audacious cunning. Her breath remained steady, the ash and sage holding strong, but beneath it, her true scent thrummed, a silent acknowledgement of the predator before her. You are the only one. No one dares to look away from. The air in the hall thickened, heavy with unspoken tension. Even Andre fell silent, his usual joviality replaced by a stunned stillness. Talon's jaw ticked once, a visible tightening of muscle, then stilled. His voice dropped, a murmur that somehow carried to every corner of the silent hall, an intimate, dangerous sound meant only for her. Little fox, The matron sucked in a sharp breath at Dasha's audacity, her rosary beads clacking a frantic rhythm. But Talon didn't bristle. He watched her longer, his gaze a deep, probing weight, as though measuring a difficult riddle he had just encountered. He saw her. Truly saw her, not as just another orphan, or a cowering child, but as something else entirely. Andre cleared his throat, a nervous sound, and made to move down the line, but Talon didn't move. His eyes, the colour of a winter sky, remained locked on hers, and in that shared gaze, Dasha felt seen for the first time in years. Not as a stray, not as an orphan, but as a creature of cunning and sharp instinct. A spark ignited, a silent recognition passing between a preternatural predator and his unexpected prey. A tension, thick and potent, hung between them, undeniable and primal. And foxes never forgot the first person who noticed their tails in the dark. The lineup ended with Andre's selections: Grigori, Minna, and Joss. A palpable wave of relief rippled through the stuffy viewing room. The matron, a woman whose perpetually pursed lips suggested a life of grievances, visibly sagged, then straightened, already fussing over paperwork, calculating fewer mouths to feed, fewer threadbare clothes to mend, fewer thin bodies to shelter. The stale scent of disinfectant and anxiety seemed to lift, ever so slightly. Talon had said nothing. He never took orphans. Not once in his 10 years as Alpha had he shown the slightest interest in the grim, yearly selection. He only ever came out of duty, a stoic, silent presence. The children, their shoulders hunched and eyes downcast from the nervous waiting, began to shift, a collective sigh rustling through them. Their small movements spoke of hope for the day's end, for escape back to the relative anonymity of the dormitory. Dasha let herself ease half a breath, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in her chest. She could fade back into the shadows, wait for the rattling, dented van that would deliver her to whichever lesser pack grudgingly absorbed the leftovers, the ones no Alpha deemed worthy. It wasn't safe, not truly, but it was a plan, a predictable, if bleak, path. Then Talon's voice cut through the quiet, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards. Dasha. Her name landed like a tangible weight, heavy and unexpected, shattering the fragile peace. Every eye in the room snapped to her, even the matrons, blinking owlishly. Dasha felt the heat of their collective gaze, a sudden, cold knot forming in her stomach. The air, already thick with the scent of nervous children and damp wool, grew impossibly tighter. She lifted her silver eyes, meeting his without flinching. His gaze was like a flint, sharp and unyielding, boring into her. Alpha. Her voice was a soft thread, barely audible, yet steady. "You'll come with me." The matron gasped, a sound like a deflating bellows. Her neat bun, usually so prim, seemed to quiver. "Alpha Talon!" she stammered, already bustling forward, a flurry of starched aprons and indignant whispers. She isn't on your list. We prepared candidates suitable for your needs. Girls with strong bloodlines, boys with a solid work ethic. Dasha is, well, she's quiet. A bit of a dreamer." She gestured vaguely. Talon's eyes, dark as polished obsidian, narrowed fractionally. His voice, when he spoke again, was devoid of any warmth, any inflection. "I wasn't asking." His tone brooked no argument, cutting off the matron's protests like a guillotine. Andre, who had been leaning against the wall, a lazy smirk on his face, pushed off with a slight chuckle. "That's a first, Talon. You don't even look twice at orphans. You usually pass them by without a flicker, barely tolerating their existence. What makes her different?" He gestured to Dasha, his gaze drifting over her slight frame before returning to Talon's face, a challenge in his eyes. Talon didn't respond directly, his broad-shouldered frame radiating an unshakable stillness. His gaze stayed locked on Dasha, an intense scrutiny that made her skin prickle. Inside, her fox mind ran the numbers with frantic clarity. 3 steps to the door, 2 burly guards blocking it with folded arms, 16 watching eyes burning holes in her. One Alpha, who had just shifted her entire future with 5 stark words, panic, cold and sharp, coiled in her ribs, a hungry beast stirring. But she hid it, as she always did, behind an unnerving stillness. Kitsune survived by control, by blending in, by never revealing their true thoughts. Outward calm, inward calculation. The thrum of her pulse was the only sound she truly registered. Andre clapped Talon's shoulder, a light tap that carried an undercurrent of mockery. "You're full of surprises today, brother. Going for the quiet ones, are we?" Talon's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his skin, but he didn't shrug Andre off. He finally broke eye contact with Dasha, turning to the matron, his voice flat. "She has value." The matron stammered, flustered and defeated. "Of course, Alpha. I'll prepare her records immediately. Her birth certificate, her medical history, her school transcripts. Don't bother." Talon's voice was a low growl, laced with finality. "She's mine now." Andre's voice slid in, smooth but edged with command. "Send everything to Talon. Every page, every scrap. He'll want it." The words rolled through the room like a clap of thunder, silencing any lingering whispers, crushing the last vestiges of the matron's authority. The room became utterly still, the air almost too heavy to breathe. Dasha inclined her head, silver eyes unreadable, reflecting the muted light from the grimy windows. Not submission, not defiance. Fox agreement. She let him think he'd chosen her. In truth, she'd allowed herself to be seen, a sliver of her carefully guarded self revealed, an invitation to a game he didn't even know he was playing. "Get your things," Talon said, his voice softer now, a command rather than a declaration. "I already have them," she answered softly, her voice barely a whisper. She shifted her small, worn satchel, which had been resting discreetly by her feet. It held a single change of clothes, a carving of a tiny fox, and the remnants of her old life. That earned the smallest flicker of reaction in his expression, a brief tightening of his lips, a minute lift of an eyebrow that might have been amusement, or perhaps a grudging respect. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving his face once again a study in impassivity. Andre chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Efficient, isn't she? You always say you value efficiency, Talon." Talon ignored him, turning for the door. Dasha fell into step behind him, her movements fluid and silent, her braid brushing her back like a fox's tail waiting to unfurl. The other children watched them go, wide-eyed and silent. As they walked past the long, cold windows of the orphanage, the younger children pressed their palms to the grimy glass, their small faces pale and anxious. Dasha lifted her hand in a small wave. Barely more than a twitch of her fingers, an almost imperceptible gesture of farewell. Minna, the youngest of Andre's chosen, smiled back, her eyes bright and wet with unshed tears, her small face streaked with dirt and hope. The chill of the late autumn air hit them as they stepped outside, sharp and invigorating. The crunch of gravel beneath their feet was loud in the sudden quiet of the yard. Across the frozen expanse, the sleek black SUV engines rumbled to life, a low, powerful growl that vibrated through the ground. Dasha climbed into the wrong car at the right time, her silver eyes reflecting the pale winter sun in the tinted glass. The interior smelled of new leather and something faintly metallic, like power. The air inside clamped down, tight and charged. She sat rigid, aware of Talon's heavy presence beside her, the subtle hum of the engine beneath her seat. Her fox mind counted every new sound. The gravel spitting from under tires, the guard's terse radio chatter, the controlled, shallow breath of the Alpha beside her. Talon didn't speak again until the massive, wrought-iron gates of the orphanage clanged shut behind them with a final, ringing thud that echoed the closing of a door on Dasha's old life. Then, without turning his head, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, he said, "You'll learn the rules. You'll follow them. No exceptions." Her lips curved, the faintest fox, smile playing at their edges, a glint of defiance in her silver eyes. "I'm a quick study." He glanced at her then, his gaze piercing, unreadable, yet lingered for a fraction of a second longer than before. "I noticed." The powerful car carried them away from the orphanage, its tires whispering over the asphalt, into a future neither of them had planned. And Dasha, fox-born and silver-eyed, nestled in the sudden, strange silence, began to wonder if mirrors were, after all, meant to shatter. The SUV rolled to a stop in a courtyard, paved with flat grey stone. The house that rose above it wasn't a manor, not really. It was a fortress. Walls of dark timber and iron trim, tall windows shuttered tight, balconies built not for romance but for watchmen. The place smelled of pine, smoke, and wolves. The tang of winter-born dampness clung to the air, cutting through the scent of wood smoke from unseen chimneys. Dasha stepped out into the air, sharp with winter. Her braid, thick and dark, tugged against her back in the cold wind that whipped around the forbidding structure. She let her silver eyes flick upward, just once, counting. 4 watchposts, each with the faint glint of a rifle barrel. 2 main gates, reinforced with iron and visibly barred. 3 blind corners where shadows pooled, perfect for ambush or concealment. The exact number of paces from the vehicle to the main entrance, every detail, every potential vulnerability or advantage, was filed away in the intricate network of her mind. This wasn't observation, it was a clinical assessment, a map-making process for survival. Talon came around the car, his boots quiet on the stone despite their weight. The heavy thud she'd expected never came, replaced by a subtle shift of sound that spoke of careful control. He didn't gesture for her to follow. He didn't need to. His presence was gravity enough, an invisible cord pulling her in his wake. The massive, iron-bound courtyard doors opened inward with a low groan of ancient hinges. A beta strode out. A formidable man whose jaw was crisscrossed with a white, jagged scar that pulled at the corner of his mouth, even when he wasn't speaking. His stance was crisp, his eyes sharp. The kind of man who lived on orders and executed them without question. His bow to Talon was short, efficient. A soldier's salute. "Alpha, borders secured. Patrols rotated as instructed. No incursions, no anomalies detected." "Good, Kian." Talon's voice carried easily, a low rumble that vibrated more than resonated. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the wind. He didn't need volume to command. His authority was an innate thing. The scarred beta, Kian, allowed his gaze to flick toward Dasha, curiosity sharpening the air, a faint, almost imperceptible sniff. His eyes lingered on her silver gaze, then her unreadable expression. "And this?" His tone held a hint of challenge, a possessive edge, a new scent, an unknown variable in his tightly controlled world. Talon's expression didn't shift. New. The single word was a dismissal, a boundary. Dasha inclined her head, calm and unhurried. Kitsune didn't fill silences. They let others stumble over them, revealing themselves in the scramble. Kian studied her for a beat too long, his eyes narrowed, frankly assessing. Dasha felt it. A testing. A subtle sniffing for weakness, for fear, for anything that didn't fit the rigid order of this place. She met his gaze without flinching, folding her hands neatly before her, as if she had all the time in the world to stand in the biting wind. Her voice, when it came, was polite, measured, devoid of inflection. "Dasha." Kian blinked, faintly thrown off by her composure, the unexpected self-introduction that defied his attempt to place her as an object. He gave a curt nod, the almost sneer on his face tightening, and stepped aside, unwilling to press the issue further under Talon's silent watch. Talon led her through the doors. The pack's main hall opened wide, beams dark with age, rough, hewn and scarred, stretched overhead like the ribs of some ancient beast. Long tables, polished smooth by elbows and fists and centuries of meals, filled the space, a colossal stone hearth, black with soot, snapped with a roaring fire that cast dancing shadows. Wolves filled the space. Young, old, enforcers in uniform with their weapons at their hips, children darting past with wooden toys, their laughter echoing. The hall buzzed with the low hum of conversation, the clatter of dishes, the faint, comforting scent of damp fur and roasting meat. All movement stopped the instant Talon entered. The hum died. The laughter evaporated. Silence dropped like a heavy, velvet curtain, absorbing every sound until only the crackle of the fire remained. Every head bowed, eyes lowered. Dasha felt it ripple through the room. Not chaotic terror, but a profound, almost spiritual deference. Respect, yes, but also a discipline wound tight as a bowstring. These wolves weren't beaten dogs. They were trained soldiers, their instincts honed to instant obedience. Talon's presence shaped them like stone walls, contained, channeled, controlled. She watched their eyes when they finally, slowly, looked up. Not love, not warmth, but precision, an unshakable certainty. This wasn't the fear of a tyrant, but the respect for an unyielding constant. The alpha of iron, she thought, confirming her initial read, and yet, not cruelty. She saw no bruises, no limping servants avoiding eye contact. Their obedience wasn't born of terror, but of certainty. Talon's rules were iron, yes, but predictable. Order, not whim. A machine might be cold, but it was reliable. This pack was a well-oiled machine. A young woman carrying a tray filled with empty flagons hurried forward, her head bowed so low her dark hair brushed the grimy floor. "Alpha, welcome back." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Carry on," Talon said, his gaze already moving past her. The young woman nearly stumbled in her haste to obey, relief flooding her features as she vanished into the kitchen. Dasha's silver gaze followed her, noting the tremor in her hand, the quick, grateful intake of breath when she was no longer directly in the Alpha's presence. Fear, yes, but also safety? Like a soldier who might fear the sergeant's wrath but trust the wall he builds, the shield he provides. Kian, the beater, stepped to Talon's side, his voice a low, clipped murmur. "Would you like the lineup called? To introduce?" His eyes flicked subtly toward Dasha. Talon's eyes shifted to Dasha, then back to Kian, a silent decision made. "No, they'll see soon enough." Kian's mouth tightened, a flicker of something unreadable. Frustration? Disagreement? Crossing his scarred face, but he inclined his head. "As you say." The battle of wills was quiet, brief, and utterly one-sided. Dasha catalogued the exchange. Kian's restraint, Talon's absolute dismissal, the subtle way wolves at the tables pretended not to listen, though their ears twitched and their posture became unnaturally rigid. Alliances, rivalries, cracks in stone. Always there if you looked closely enough. She would look. Talon started up the wide, polished stairs. Dasha followed, each step an echo against the dark wood. She let her fingers trail lightly against the banister, eyes scanning every detail. The narrow stairwell, an easy choke point, difficult for an enemy to ascend in force. A window halfway up, shuttered from the outside, but potentially an exit, if needed, though a risky one. Her fox mind purred with satisfaction at each note taken. On the landing, Talon opened a door. The room beyond was spare. A single, neatly made bed against one wall. A sturdy wooden chest. A small, unadorned desk. A single window, shuttered but with light filtering through the cracks, overlooked the courtyard. Not lavish, functional, utilitarian. "This is yours," he said. Dasha stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, a clean, woody scent, warmed slightly by the distant hearth. She touched the desk, the grain of the wood smooth under her fingers. "Thank you, Alpha." Her voice was soft, respectful, and carefully crafted humility. Kitsune knew when to bow and when to bend. So far they appeared to break. Wolves, strong and direct, often mistook bending for weakness. That was the trick. Talon studied her in silence for a long moment. His gaze was heavy, but not probing. Weighing, measuring, the way one tests a weapon before deciding if it's sharp enough, if it will hold an edge. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, a quiet command that nevertheless filled the small room. My pack is disciplined, efficient. You'll obey the rules. You'll work. You'll not cause disruption. It wasn't a warning, it was a statement of fact, a declaration of the immutable laws of his domain. Dasha lifted her silver eyes, calm as still water. I listen well. I learn quickly. Her gaze held his, unwavering. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, perhaps. A brief ghost of a curve on his lips, though it was gone in a heartbeat, too fleeting to confirm. He nodded once, a definitive gesture. We'll see. Kian's voice, a clipped bark, called up the stairwell from the hall below. Alpha, the council runner is here with messages. Talon turned for the door. At the threshold, he paused, his broad back to her for a moment before he twisted, looking back. His eyes met hers again, stark, silver, meeting dark intensity. Fox and wolf. You notice things, he said, repeating her words from the orphanage, a quiet observation that was also a question. Dasha tilted her head just enough, a fox's subtle gesture, a knowing shift. Only what's worth noticing. Her tone was cool, factual. She offered no more, no less. For a fraction of a moment, the corner of his mouth curved, a shadow. Smile that barely registered. Then it was gone, swallowed by his usual impassivity, and he stepped out, leaving the door ajar. His boots struck the stairs like drumbeats, receding quickly into the sounds of the hall below. Dasha stood alone in the room, silver eyes bright in the firelight spilling from the hall. She walked to the window, touched the frame, and traced the edge of the shuttered glass. She counted the panes, felt for weakness in the seals, and marked the placement of the internal locks. Her braid brushed her back like a tail twitching, sensing, assessing, fox in a wolf's den. And already, she was taking notice. The corridor, usually a passage of hushed efficiency, hummed with a different kind of tension tonight. It still smelled of sharp pine polish from the morning's cleaning, but beneath it clung the faint, earthy scent of wolf musk, a primal undercurrent to the clan's polished facade. Lamplight, buttery and warm, spilled from sconces, casting long, wavering shadows that danced with every draught. Dasha moved through it, an almost spectral presence, her steps light, so silent they barely disturbed the dust motes. A silver tray, laden with teacups and a delicate porcelain pot, seemed to float before her, perfectly balanced atop her steady hands. Not a single tremor marred the surface of the amber liquid in the cups, a testament to her unwavering control. She had chosen to stay quiet since her arrival, to watch, to let the intricate, often brutal, patterns of the pack knit themselves into the resilient fabric of her memory. But tonight, the pattern snarled. An Amiga, undeniably pretty with her artfully tousled curls and a face liberally dabbed with coal and rose extracts, leaned with calculated nonchalance against the polished wall. Her vibrant perfume, thick with cloying sweetness and a hint of something musky and inviting, preceded her like a siren's call. As Dasha approached, the Amiga's full, painted lips, a shade of deep berry, curled into a slow, deliberate sneer. Her eyes, narrowed and glittering with an unvarnished jealousy, raked over Dasha's simple tunic and quiet demeanour. Well, the Omega purred, her voice a low, throaty rumble, designed to carry, so this is the stray the Alpha dragged home. No wonder no one adopted you. Too plain, too quiet. Who would want a shadow when they can have fire? A cluster of young wolves at the far end of the hall, their eyes bright with a predatory eagerness, snickered. They shifted, anticipating a spectacle, a public shaming. Their youthful hunger for drama almost palpable in the sudden stillness of the corridor. Dasha stopped. The air seemed to thicken, the lamplight dimming imperceptibly around her. Slowly, deliberately, She turned, a movement so fluid it was almost liquid. Her silver eyes, usually pools of still water, glowed faintly in the low light, moonlight caught in the deepest part of a mountain lake. She tilted her head just so, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture, the fox's ancient sign, neither threat nor submission, but something slyer, something that invited underestimation. The tea tray remained perfectly steady, a defiant island of calm in the burgeoning tension. Her voice was calm, soft, yet it carried, cutting through the thick silence like a velvet-wrapped knife. "Stray, yes," she said, her tone devoid of emotion. "Unwanted, perhaps, but still standing where I am. And you?" Her gaze flicked, slow and deliberate, from the Omega's painted lips down to her nervous hands, which had begun to clench and unclench against her silk tunic. "Are still an Omega, despite all your fire." The words landed like silk over steel, a gentle impact that belied their cutting edge. The Omega blinked, caught completely off guard. Her elaborate facade flickered, revealing a flash of genuine shock. "What?" she began, a raw, unformed sound. Dasha's lips curved, the faintest fox smile ghosting across them, a mere whisper of amusement. She leaned in just a fraction, her voice dropping to an even softer, more intimate tone, yet it resonated through the suddenly breathless hall. "You mock shadows, yet it seems you've never noticed. Shadows are the only thing even fire cannot burn away." The hallway went utterly, completely still. The snickering at the end of the hall died, crushed by the weight of Dasha's quiet pronouncement. The young wolves, who had been eager for entertainment, now held their breath, their eyes wide and fixed. The Omega's face flushed a furious, hot red, her carefully constructed composure unraveling. Words failed her, caught in a throat suddenly constricted by shame and fury. Her biting jealousy, laid bare and mocked, hung in the air like bitter smoke. Dasha simply inclined her head, graceful, almost ethereal, as if she'd offered nothing more than a polite greeting, and turned to continue down the hall, her tray unshaken. But the Alpha had already stepped into view. Talon hadn't hidden his appetites, and the Omega preening before him was one of many who warmed his bed when the night stretched long and discipline gave way to desire. Dasha's silver eyes caught the smug curve of the girl's lips, and in it, she saw the weakness of wolves who mistook rut for power. Kitsune knew better. Talon leaned against the dark, polished wood of the stairwell post, arms folded across his broad chest, his expression unreadable, a mask of stone and shadow. His presence, an almost physical force, instantly filled the space, absorbing the lingering tension and replacing it with something cold and absolute. He'd heard every word. The Omega's breath hitched, a tiny, desperate gasp. Her confidence shriveled instantly, her body bowing low, almost cowering as her gaze fell upon him. "Alpha," she stammered, her voice stripped of its earlier bravado. Talon didn't spare her a glance, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. His eyes, dark as midnight and sharp as honed obsidian, were locked solely on Dasha. He watched her, a predator studying its prey, or perhaps a hunter assessing a new, valuable, and utterly unexpected specimen. "You speak easily," he said, his voice low, deliberate, a deep rumble that vibrated in the suddenly heavy air of the hallway. Dasha paused. The tea tray, still perfectly balanced, remained steady in her hands. Slowly, she turned, her silver eyes meeting his dark gaze without a single flinch. Only when there is something worth saying, something shifted. Not in the hushed pack hall, not in the trembling Omega, but in him. A subtle tightening around his eyes, a fractional clenching of his jaw. For the first time, someone had bent his order, not with claw or growl or blatant defiance, but with words, with wit, with a quiet, understated power, a foxfire hidden behind deceptively quiet eyes. Talon straightened slowly, uncoiling from the stairwell post. His jaw tightened further, but not in anger. It was a tension born of intrigue, of a challenge subtly laid. His gaze lingered a fraction too long. like a man studying a complex puzzle he'd thought utterly unsolvable, a landscape he believed he knew intimately, only to discover a hidden, uncharted valley. "Carry on," he said at last, the words clipped, definitive. Dasha bowed her head slightly, a gesture of deference that was nonetheless infused with her inherent, fox-like grace, and walked on, her steps as silent and assured as before. Behind her, the Omega trembled, a barely suppressed shiver running through her slender frame, left alone in the heavy, crushing silence Talon left in his wake. The young wolves, their brief excitement dissipated, scattered, sensing the dangerous shift in the pack's delicate power dynamics. The corridor, once again, was left to the pine polish, the wolf musk, and the lingering echoes of a quiet, unexpected clash. The great hall of Talon's packhouse always smelled of smoke, pine resin, and the deep, earthy musk of dozens of bodies pressed together. Tonight, though, it reeked of something more feral. A cloying blend of expensive perfumes, the raw tang of wolf lust, and the nervous sweat of ambition. Torches sputtered in their sconces along the stone walls, casting dancing shadows that swallowed and revealed faces in turn. Silverware clinked against heavy plates, a brittle counterpoint to the low hum of conversation. Omegas, chosen for their beauty and compliant nature, draped themselves like elaborate ivy around Talon, their soft robes rustling with every shift. Their laughter, too loud, and edged with a desperate edge, scraped against Dasha's ears. They leaned in too close, their fingers brushing his arms, his shoulders, as though they might catch his power, his very essence, by touch alone. Their desperate need hung in the air, thick and palpable. Dasha sat at the far end of the long oak table, a solitary island of calm. Her posture was composed, her back straight, silver eyes half-lidded as she slowly chewed her bread. Her fox mind, sharp and observant, worked beneath her calm mask, dissecting the scene with a quiet disdain that flickered in her gaze like distant lightning. She had passed the open hall once, earlier that evening, before the full feast began. Shadows, deep and heavy, spilled from the torches in a private antechamber. Talon had stood there, half-dressed, an Omega pressed to him like ivy clinging to weathered stone, her face a mask of desperate adoration. His voice had been low, a resonant rumble that promised and commanded, even in pleasure. Dasha's fox mind had recoiled, a cold shiver tracing her spine. Her lips twitched then with the unspoken thought, a king who beds servants and calls it loyalty is still just a man who hungers, and hunger, even beneath a crown, is no less vile. Across the large expanse of the table, an Omega with a cascade of dark hair draped herself against Talon's shoulder, her whispers teasing his ear. A ripple of suppressed giggles followed from the other women. Talon's lips curved in a faint smirk, eyes hooded, indulging them without warmth. It was a practiced, calculated indifference. A show of appetite and control all in one, designed to remind every soul in the room of his dominance. Dasha's nose twitched, a barely perceptible tremor. She caught the sour edge of thinly veiled jealousy wafting from the women around him, a jealous stench that cut through the pleasant aromas of roasted meat and mulled wine. And beneath it, she detected Talon's iron restraint. A taut, almost brittle control that hinted at hunger, yes, but also a profound, empty void. He plays the beast, so they'll fear him, so they'll flock to the illusion of his power, she mused, her internal voice cold and clear. But his hunger is more hollow than theirs. An echo chamber of flesh, not true desire. Her lip curled, the barest, almost imperceptible twitch. A flicker of profound scorn, gone in an instant. Talon, despite the distance, despite the clamour, caught it. The faint disdain flashing across her otherwise serene face was so quick, so subtle, anyone else would have missed it entirely, especially given the fawning adoration surrounding him. But not Talon. Not when her eyes gleamed silver and fox-bright in the firelight, cutting through the haze of the room. His smirk flattened, the lines of his face hardening almost imperceptibly. "Something amuses you, little fox?" His voice, a low rumble, effortlessly carried across the table, cutting through the din. The clinking of forks ceased. The Omegas surrounding him went utterly still, their heads swiveling, glancing between him and Dasha like startled birds caught in the sudden silence. Every eye in the hall was suddenly pinned on the two of them. Dasha slowly lifted her gaze, meeting his, her expression serene, almost innocently inquiring. "Amuses?" "No." Her tone was soft, almost melodious, polite to a fault. "It only strikes me how easily wolves confuse being desired with being respected. A temporary appetite for lasting reverence." The silence that followed was brutal, a physical weight pressing down on the room. Forks, mid-air, froze. Chairs creaked as bodies unconsciously shifted. The Omega on Talon's shoulder stiffened, her face contorting with a sudden, venomous anger, ready to lash out. "Careful, girl!" the Omega hissed at Dasha, her nails digging into Talon's bicep, as if clinging to her very place in the world. "You speak out of turn!" Dasha's smile curved slowly, slyly, a predator's smile. Her silver eyes flickered to the Omega, then back to Talon. "I'm not the one trembling." The Omega flushed a furious, mottled red, her fingers twitching away from Talon's arm as if burned. Talon, golden eyes narrowed to predatory slits, leaned forward, elbows on the table, his gaze pinned to Dasha. He ignored the Omega's outburst, his focus entirely on the girl who dared to defy him. His voice was quiet, a dangerous undertone to it that nevertheless managed to hush the entire hall, drawing every ear closer. "You mistake boldness for cleverness, little fox." For the first time, Dasha let the word fox hang in the air between them, no longer a mere label but a challenge. Her eyes gleamed with an almost imperceptible triumph. Her voice, though still calm, was clear and cutting. "And you, Alpha, mistake obedience for loyalty." A collective gasp rippled down the benches, a wave of stunned realization. Forks hit wooden tables with quiet thuds. Every face in the room mirrored the same incredulous shock. Talon didn't move. He didn't scold. He didn't strike. He only held her gaze, a tempest of conflicting emotions swirling in his golden eyes. Surprise, frustration, a flicker of something akin to reluctant respect. For the first time in years, someone had met his power without bowing, without flinching, without resorting to fangs or force. It had come from a girl with silver eyes who saw right through him and held his empty hunger up for all the world to see. The yard behind the pack house was a bowl of packed earth, ringed by dark pines and tall spears of winter grass. Frost clung to the shadowed edges, the sun baked the center into hard clay. Ropes hung from a beam, sandbags lined one wall, and a rack of wooden practice blades leaned at attention. The air smelled of sweat, iron, smoke, and wolf. Dasha stood where the light met the shade, silver eyes half-lidded, counting like she always did. 3 exits from the yard, 2 were watched. 5 enforcers in the circle, a 6th at the water cask. The man at the cask favored his left ankle. The tall one in the red-stitched vest blinked when the sun flared off steel. Light bothered him. Cade, the broad-shouldered one with a break poorly set in his nose, smiled like a man already pleased with the memory of victory. "Alpha wants to see what she's got," Cade called, spreading his arms. His voice carried easily. "My guess? Not much." Snickers from the watchers along the fence. A junior wolf cupped his hands around his mouth. "Careful, Cade, she might bite." "I've had worse," Cade said to laughter. From the shade of the porch, Talon leaned against a pillar. He'd left his jacket behind. The white of his shirt caught the light. The rest of him swallowed it. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The yard had been his long before it had been anyone else's. Dasha looked at the ground, at the way the clay had cracked in broad plates, at the scatter of grit along the seam lines. Her palms itched. She rolled her shoulders once, letting the movement sink into place. When she looked up, her face was unreadable, calm as still water. The beta moved to the edge of the circle and jerked his chin. 2 minutes. Touch the ground and you're out. No claws." His eyes slid to Dasha, measuring. "And try not to break anything you plan to use again." Cade grinned, stepping in. I'll be gentle. Thank you, Dasha said, sincere as a prayer. The beta's hand cut the air. Begin! Cade lunged, a wall of muscle and momentum. Dasha did not meet him head-on. She pivoted. His weight hit the space where she had been, his heel scraping across the band of grit she'd noted near the seam. He stumbled. A fraction! And in that same fraction, she touched his wrist with 2 fingers and guided his arm past her hip. His speed carried him forward. He landed on one knee. A hiss from the fence line. Cade's ears reddened. Dasha shifted back, weight balanced like a reed in the wind. Her silver eyes flickered over him. On your feet! Or are you broken already? Cade bared his teeth, the growl rough in his throat. The command was as much for himself as for her. Forcing through the pain, he surged upright, chest heaving, and lunged again. She gave ground but never straight back. Always on an angle. Always circling to his bad side. Always where his shadow was longest. His breath grew louder. She could smell his temper crowding out his control. Cade feinted left, cut right. Dasha let his arm slide past her shoulder, caught his sleeve at the seam, and twisted. Wood cracked against clay as his practice blade struck the ground. She released him at once and stepped away. Lucky, someone muttered. Not luck, another said under his breath. Cade wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Enough dancing. Dasha tilted her head. Then stop chasing the music. Laughter, startled and quick, ran the fence. Cade flushed all the way to his hairline. The beta raised a hand. Switch, he said. The tall one in the red-stitched vest. Ren stepped in, blinking at the light. He rolled his neck and leveled his practice blade. Ren didn't rush. He probed. Dasha watched his feet. He dragged his right toe as he shifted weight. That foot would be late to arrive wherever the rest of him went. She angled her body and let him come to her, her gaze sliding not to his blade but to the crease in his elbow that would have to open if he wanted to reach. When he stepped, she stepped first. Her palm brushed his forearm. Her shoulder checked his line. He found himself turned, then turned again, always just missing the place he needed to be. He blinked hard as the sun flashed off a steel ring in the rack behind her. His blade dipped. Dasha's hand closed lightly on his wrist. A twist, a pivot, a clean extraction. The practice blade left his grip and thumped into the dirt. Ren blinked at his empty hand, then at her. How? Your right foot, she said gently, as if offering bread. It tells your secrets. More laughter. Other enforcers were not laughing. They were watching Talon now, measuring his interest the way they measured weather. The beta clapped once. Again, he said, voice tight. 2 on 1. Cade barked a laugh, relief in it. Now we're talking. He scooped his blade from the ground and came in at her left. Ren circled to her right. The yard held its breath. Dasha moved before they did, not toward them, sideways, into the brightest patch of sun. She blinked when her pupils tightened, letting her lashes hide her eyes. When Cade came straight for that brightness, she took 1 half step back. The glare took his depth, not his stride. His blade cut air. Ren's breath hitched, caught between committing and correcting. Dasha cut across their lines like a stitch closing a tear. Cade and Ren collided shoulder to shoulder. Cade swore. Ren hissed. The fence erupted. Dasha retreated 3 steps and stood easy, hands loose at her sides. A strand of hair had slipped free. She tucked it behind her ear with a small, neat gesture. Her heart beat fast. She did not let it show. Cade rounded on her. Careful now. He tested with short jabs. She swayed just enough that the jabs missed. Stand still, he snapped. I am, she said. You're not looking. He came in angry. She dipped, slid, and put the toe of her boot precisely on the cracked seam where the clay would shear. When his foot struck that same seam a beat later, it skated. His shoulder dropped. Dasha set her palm to his forearm and borrowed his fall. He slapped the ground to save his face. Silence fell. Somewhere, a hawk cried over the pines. The beta lifted his hand as if to call a halt, hesitated, then let it fall. He was watching Talon now, waiting for the nod that did not come. Again, Cade said through his teeth. No, Dasha said. The word wasn't defiance. It was simple and calm, like water poured into a cup. Cade blinked. What? You're tired, she said, as if discussing the weather. Your balance is gone. You'll get hurt, and I'll be blamed for not being kind. A strangled noise escaped someone near the fence. Ren pressed his mouth flat to hide a smile. Cade looked to the porch as if for permission to be offended. Talon did not oblige him. The Alpha's face was carved in stone. His eyes gave nothing, but his weight had shifted forward in the last exchange and hadn't shifted back. The Beta cleared his throat. Ren out! Cade out! Maro! In! The man from the water cask. Maro set his cup aside and limped toward the circle. He was greying at the temples and had scars that told steadier stories than Cade's bravado. He bowed to Dasha. A fraction. She returned it. Ready? He asked. Yes, she said. He came with patience, not heat. He tested timing, not strength. She had to work to keep the angles clean. Her breath went thin and cool. She counted again. His inhale, her exhale, the Beta's boots scraping the plank, the 3-beat swing of the rope overhead in the winter wind. When Maro's blade met hers, the wood thrummed through her arm. She let the vibration carry her step. They turned twice, her choosing, then his, until they had circled nearly back to where they began. He smiled, briefly, and was surprised. She returned it. Enough, the Beta said, voice rough. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Talon, and Talon had finally moved. The Alpha left the porch slow as dusk, boots neat on the steps, each footfall a metronome the yard's heartbeat fell into. He crossed the circle and stopped 2 paces from Dasha. She lifted her chin. Her silver eyes reflected him in 2 pale coins. He studied her without words for a length that made lesser wolves twitch. She did not twitch. At last. Why did you release Cade when you had him? Because he would have broken something to prove he didn't, she said. And then I would have had to apologize. A murmur rippled. Cade stared at the ground. Why move into the sun? Talon asked. Men, look where it hurts them least, she said. Light makes lies and people choose them. That got a longer silence. The Beta's mouth ticked, like a man trying not to be impressed. And Maro? Talon asked. Dasha glanced at the older enforcer, a small acknowledgement. He listens, she said simply. Talon's gaze held hers a heartbeat longer. Something almost like warmth skimmed the edges of it. No, not warmth. Interest. He inclined his head to the smallest degree. You don't fight like the others, he said. Dasha let the faintest smile touch her mouth. Why waste strength fighting like everyone else? Wolves use teeth. A pause, silk smooth. I use my mind. The yard breathed out in a ragged sigh. Some of them bristled. Others felt the back of their necks prickle, as if someone had walked across their graves. Talon's eyes cooled and sharpened at once. Again, the Beta began, but Talon lifted a hand, and the word died. That's enough, the Alpha said. Drills resume in 10. Groans and relief in equal measure followed. Wood clacked as blades were returned to their rack. Cade stalked to the water cask and drank like a man drowning. Maro gave Dasha a nod of respect and limped away. Dasha smoothed the hem of her sleeve, pulse steadying. The dirt on her palms made a fine powder. She rubbed it between her fingers and thumb and let it fall. Talon turned as if to leave, then paused, half in shadow. His voice came softer than before, meant for her and no one else. Little Fox. It wasn't a challenge this time. It wasn't praise. It was a name that tasted like a discovery, a man preferred not to have made in public. She did not look away. Alpha. His mouth did that not quite smile he rarely allowed, there and gone like a change in weather. He left the yard without another word. Around her, the pack pretended to stretch. They watched her from the corners of their eyes. Some are jealous, some are wary, some thoughtful. Dasha breathed in the smell of clay and pine and iron and catalogued the new map opening beneath her feet. She had not won them. She had not tried. But she had learned their weights, their tells, their seams, and he had learned something about her. The thing he could not name. She wiped her hands on her trousers, tucked the stray hair behind her ear again, and stepped out of the circle, as if the earth had never shifted. Inside, her mind was bright and busy, tales of thought flicking like candle flames. The drills began anew. The yard shouted and struck and sweated. The winter sun slid a degree toward the trees. Dasha stood at the fence and watched, listening to the rhythm of wolves, counting, always counting. The pack-house dining hall was a cavern of raw, comforting noise. Wooden benches scraped to constant rhythm against the rough stone floor, punctuated by the thump of heavy mugs and the booming chorus of a bawdy hunting song. Firelight, rich and buttery, spilled over scarred tables, illuminating faces flushed with ale and exertion. The air hung thick, a layered tapestry of scent, the rich, savoury steam of roasted venison curling up from platters, the sharp, clean bite of pine smoke from the hearth, the musky tang of sweat, and the pervasive, earthy dampness of wet wool, clinging heavily to bodies bundled against the mountain chill. Every breath tasted of wolf and hearth. Amidst the convivial chaos, Dasha's fox-sharp senses cut through the cacophony, isolating a bitter, acrid scent as clear as spoiled wine. Envy. The Omega was at it again. Her lips, painted a scandalous red with berry juice, were in constant motion, and her laugh, a high, trilling sound that climbed like ivy, wrapping itself insidiously around anyone careless enough to linger, drew eyes like moths to a flame. She leaned conspiratorially toward a cluster of pack sisters, hunched low over their mugs, letting her words drip slow and sweet into their ears like poison. "Found her scent strange, didn't you?" she murmured, tracing the rim of her mug with a perfectly manicured nail, her gaze flicking surreptitiously towards Dasha. "Barely a wolf sometimes, like she doesn't belong. Like maybe the Alpha only chose her out of pity." Her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper, yet it seemed to magnify in the crowded hall, a thread in the whisper web she was spinning. A few of the sisters' eyes darted nervously toward Dasha, who sat at the far end, utterly silent, her spoon turning with deliberate slowness in her stew. She was a solitary figure, a stark contrast to the boisterous groups. "And she smiles too much," the Omega went on, her voice dropping another notch, but not enough to truly be missed by anyone nearby. "Like she knows things she shouldn't, or worse, like she's mocking us all." She leaned even closer, her breath warm against another sister's ear, the red lips almost grazing the lobe. "If you ask me, Talon tires of pets quickly. Best not get attached to her. The fall will be harder." The underlying message, unspoken, pulsed with vicious intent. "Talon's touch belongs to me. He'd never waste it on a stray like her." Dasha listened, a slow, predatory amusement curling in her foxtail mind. Desire made mortals foolish. Wolves, especially those blinded by it, even more so. She didn't need to claw back at the girl. Her lies were already choking her, a tightening noose of her own making. A ripple of uneasy, uncertain laughter spread through the cluster. Heads turned. Dasha felt the combined weight of their sideways glances pressing against her shoulders like cold, insistent hands. It wasn't curiosity. It was a blend of suspicion and a curious relief that the Omega's poison wasn't aimed at them. She inhaled once, slow, steady, drawing in the many scents of the hall, the heat of the fire, the dampness of the stones, the sour tang of the Omega's envy. Her fox mind stretched, tails curling and uncurling in thought. Every word cast by the Omega was a string, every averted glance, a knot in a flimsy net. She only needed to tug the right one. Setting her spoon down with a soft click against the ceramic bowl, Dasha rose. Her boots, soft leather on stone, seemed to whisper rather than scrape as she crossed the hall. Each step was unhurried, deliberate, a silent predator moving through a forest. As she drew closer, the boisterous conversation around the Omega's table faltered. The easy laughter died. Even the crackle of the fire seemed to hush, as if the very air held its breath. Forgive me, Dasha said, her voice warm, clear, and perfectly pitched to carry. I couldn't help but overhear. The Omega straightened, her posture stiffening, her expression shifting instantly to saccharine innocence. Oh? We were only talking, nothing more. Talking? Dasha's lips curved. A slow, sly smile that had the elegant, dangerous edge of a newly sharpened blade. No, you were weaving, but threads spun of spite and untruth unravel easily. She tilted her head, her silver eyes glinting in the firelight, assessing, challenging. Shall we see? The Omega scoffed, a brittle sound that barely masked a tremor of nerves. You think you can shame me? No, Dasha said, her tone as calm and unruffled as still water. You've already done that yourself, quite thoroughly. She shifted her gaze, turning to the nearest wolf, a young woman who had leaned in to listen to every word, her face now a mask of feigned ignorance. Tell me, sister, when has she ever spoken of you without comparing you subtly or otherwise to herself? The young wolf blinked, her eyes widening slightly, a flicker of something long buried surfacing. She does, sometimes. Yes. Her voice trailed off, a nascent discomfort taking root. Dasha's gaze shifted, cool and discerning, to another sister, older, with weary eyes that now met Dasha's with sudden, unwelcome recognition. And you? How often has she whispered about your accomplishments, your rank, your very worth when you were not there to answer? The wolf flinched, a subtle jerk of her chin, and quickly looked away, her face flushing. The precise, surgical questions had hit their mark. The Omega's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Her color drained, leaving her skin stark white before flaring a furious blotchy red. Lies! She snapped, her voice cracking, high and thin. Strange, Dasha mused, her tone still soft, still utterly unbothered by the outburst. For one so practiced at lies, you trip over your own so quickly. A ripple of laughter spread through the hall. Not cruel, but sharp. A sudden release of shared understanding. It wasn't directed at Dasha, but cut the Omega clean from the center of her self-spun web, leaving her isolated and exposed. The pack's eyes turned, not to the enigmatic newcomer, but to the one who had pulled their strings too long. The puppet master suddenly unveiled. Humiliation raw on her face, the Omega slammed her mug down with a reverberating crack that silenced the lingering murmurs. She pushed back from the table, scrambling to her feet, skirts snapping behind her as she stormed from the hall, her retreat more a desperate flight than an angered exit. Dasha returned to her seat without flourish, without a hint of triumph. She simply lifted her spoon again, resuming her meal as if nothing out of the ordinary had passed. But the eyes that now watched her, from the pack sisters, from the hunters, even from the bards, brimmed no longer with suspicion, but with a burgeoning curiosity. Respect even, a new, quiet understanding of the fox in their midst. At the far end of the hall, where shadows deepened, Talon had watched everything. He remained utterly still, his vast frame a sentinel against the stone wall. His expression never shifted, a mask of carved granite, but his gaze, dark and incandescent, lingered on Dasha like a blade laid across a whetstone, sharpening itself in observation. Later, outside in the biting cold of the mountain night, the beater, Rorik, stepped up beside Talon. The air was sharp with the clean scent of pine resin and the brittle chill of frost, ghosting silver in the moonlight. She sees too much, Rorik said, his voice low, crisp like cold air, an observation more than a judgment. His arms were folded tightly across his chest, his wolf form coiled beneath his human skin. Talon's jaw flexed, a subtle knot of muscle. His breath plumed silver in the moonlight, dissolving instantly. Yes, he murmured, his eyes still fixed on the distant hall, where faintly, Dasha's quiet, fox-like laughter seemed to echo from within. She does. And though he didn't admit it, not to his beta, not even to himself, A part of him was no longer sure if that profound perceptiveness was a danger to guard against or a formidable weapon to wield. The war room of Talon's pack house was a place of stone and silence, a tomb of strategy. Maps stretched across the central table, their edges curled and brittle from years of candle heat, their surfaces scarred by claws pressed down in thought by the accidental drip of spilled ale. The air hung thick with the scent of dried ink, aged leather, and a faint, metallic tang of copper from the whetstones stacked against the wall, tools for blades and teeth alike. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the high, narrow windows, highlighting the stillness. Talon stood at the head of the table, broad shoulders rigid beneath his tunic, one hand braced against the parchment of the northern borders, as if he could hold the whole sprawling territory still by sheer, unyielding will. His enforcers had gone, their heavy footsteps fading down the echoing halls. Even his beta, Rorik, had departed, leaving only Talon in the oppressive quiet. A quiet he usually welcomed, a sanctuary for his thoughts, or so he thought. From the shadowed archway leading deeper into the packhouse's oldest wing, Dasha watched. She hadn't meant to linger, had only been passing through, but her fox mind always pulled her toward patterns, toward the hidden truths beneath the surface of things. The way Talon's fingers, thick and calloused, traced the intricate lines of disputed borders, the way his jaw tightened, a muscle rippling beneath the skin. When his gaze fell upon rival alpha markings, it was more than just strength. It was the posture of a man carrying a weight heavier than any sword, heavier than the very stones of this ancient house. Her silver eyes, luminous even in the dimness, followed him like a mirror, cool, steady, reflecting his burdened silhouette without judgment. Talon felt it. Not the sound of her soft breath, not the shift of air, but the subtle, unnerving weight of her stare, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, a phantom touch through the silence. He turned sharply, a predatory instinct, eyes narrowing to slits, gaze locking onto hers across the expanse of the room. "You watched too closely," he said, his voice a low grind, like flint striking steel, reverberating in the stone chamber. Dasha didn't flinch, didn't so much as blink. She stepped into the room, soft leather boots whispering against the polished flagstones, the barest brush of fox cunning in the upward curve of her lips. "Only because you stand so still." His brow furrowed, a thundercloud gathering over his eyes. "Still?" he echoed, the word layered with an alpha's incredulity. "You stand," she said, tilting her head slightly, her silver eyes gleaming, catching the faint glint of a distant candle, as though you must hold the world together with your hands. But even the strongest grip leaves cracks. A primal growl rumbled deep in Talon's chest, barely audible but vibrating through the floor. He took a step toward her, then another, the sheer force of his presence like a storm rolling down a mountain, the very air seeming to thicken and press down. Wolves bowed to this presence, instinctively dropping their eyes, baring their necks. Most humans, caught in his gaze, would have recoiled, stammered, or fled. Dasha did not. She held her ground, a delicate, unyielding spear point in the storm. "You dare speak to me this way?" His voice, now, was a low snarl, threaded with a quiet, lethal danger that promised pain. Her lashes lowered slightly, not in submission, but in a calm, almost contemplative assessment. "Your strength makes you feared," she murmured, her voice soft, yet it cut through the oppressive tension like a finely honed blade. The words weren't an accusation, nor were they praise. They were simple, unadorned truths, delivered with the dispassionate clarity of someone observing a natural phenomenon. Her silver gaze didn't waver, piercing him. "But fear isn't loyalty." The room seemed to tighten around them, air pulled thin and sharp. Several candles scattered across the table, and along the walls flickered wildly, the flames elongating, dancing as if agitated by some unseen current, then guttering down to mere beads of light, casting grotesque, shifting shadows on the stone walls. Talon's breath left him in a ragged gasp, like a growl caged behind his teeth. No one, No beta, no council elder, no rival alpha, not even his father, had ever said such a thing to his face. Wolves bowed, wolves trembled. But she, this stray, this slip of a girl, with the ancient fire of a fox in her eyes, looked at him as if he were not Alpha, but merely a man exposed. "You speak as if you know my pack better than I," he said, each word measured, dangerous, a stone dropped into a deep well. "I don't presume to know," Dasha replied softly, folding her hands before her, a gesture of quiet self-possession. "I only see, and sometimes seeing is the sharper blade." Silence stretched, taut and humming with unspoken challenges. The guttering candle flames, now mere embers, struggled to reclaim their light, casting the room in a deeper gloom, broken only by the pale sheen on Dasha's eyes. Talon studied her, every muscle in his body coiled tight, ready to spring, to dominate, to crush this defiance. And yet, beneath the steel, beneath the danger, beneath the Alpha's fury, something unsettled coiled in his chest, a sliver of unease. He should have dismissed her. He should have ordered her back to the Spartan quarters, meant for strays, a stern command that would brook no argument. Instead, he found himself saying, quiet, almost reluctant, the words surprising even himself, "You speak like one who has never feared." Her fox smile flickered, wry and fleeting. A shadow touched with a hint of ancient sorrow. "On the contrary, Alpha," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that still managed to fill the room. "I fear plenty. I fear starvation. I fear loneliness. I fear the slow rot of a lie. But fear is not the same as kneeling." For a long moment, Talon only stared, the dying light of the candles reflected in her silver eyes, creating a distorted, shimmering mirror. He saw not just her defiance, not just her unnerving calm, but a shocking reflection of himself, his habits, his hunger, the cold, exacting order he had wrapped around his pack like iron armor. He saw the isolation of command, the weight of constant vigilance, and the chill certainty that he was utterly alone in bearing it. And in that reflection, in the depths of her steady, unblinking gaze, the Alpha of Iron felt a crack form. Not a physical fracture in the stone, but a deep, resonant fissure in the well-built walls of his composure. The air in the room, still heavy with the scent of old maps and copper, now also carried the faint, bitter tang of something irrevocably broken. The borderlands were quiet, too quiet. Even the night insects had stilled, their usual thrumming symphony swallowed by a cold, oppressive hush that clung to the spectral pines. The air itself felt thick, tasting faintly of ozone and stale, decomposing leaf litter, despite the sharp, clean scent of frost creeping in. The patrol of wolves moved along the tree line, the crunch of their heavy boots on pine needles muffled, each step deliberate, steeped in a growing watchfulness. "Odd," muttered Garin, the lead enforcer, his breath misting. His ears twitched, scanning the shadowy depths of the woods. The winds shifted, blowing from the northwest. Yet I don't catch a whisper of the usual game trails. Even the rabbits are holding their breath. Reese grunted in agreement. "Aye, and the scents. Faint, but I caught a whiff of something old near the Twin Oaks. Too old to be fresh prey, too faint for a recent traveller, like a phantom scent, just to prickle the nose." He paused, his gaze sweeping the inky blackness. "Has the river patrol checked in yet?" "I've not heard their whistles." A ripple of unease passed through the small group. The river patrol was usually punctual. Their silence now added another layer to the growing dread. Dasha walked a few paces behind them, her hood drawn low, hands clasped as if she was simply along to observe, but her silver eyes missed nothing. Every snapped twig, every faint, almost imperceptible mark in the damp, dark soil painted a cohesive, chilling picture to her fox mind. 3 passes of the same boot. No, claw boot, she noted, the image sharp in her mind. He circled. He wanted to be seen, or wanted us to believe we saw enough. a feint. Her nostrils flared, drawing in the subtle nuances of the air. It reeked faintly of smoke from a distant banked fire and a metallic tang iron, she identified. Wrong sensed this deep in Talon's land, far from any established human settlement. Not just wrong, but purposeful. Garen straightened, his shoulders slumping slightly. All clear, I reckon. Just the night playing tricks. No. Dasha's voice cut through the strained silence, soft but certain, like a shard of ice. They turned, frowning, their faces stark in the dappled moonlight. She pointed to the base of a gnarled oak where the bark had been scored, a jagged, shallow claw mark etched into the rough surface. That mark isn't random. It's fresh, yes, but not of a wolf. Too shallow, too neat in its carelessness. A distraction. Her gaze flicked to the underbrush, where the soil dipped unnaturally, a barely perceptible disturbance. They knelt there, 2, perhaps 3, waiting. Not for us, not yet, waiting for something else. Rhys scoffed, his muzzle wrinkled in disdain. You think you can teach us how to track? You've never even run a patrol, Dasha. This is wolf territory, wolf craft. Dasha only tilted her head, her silver eyes gleaming faintly, reflecting the distant stars, a predatory gleam. Perhaps. But if I'm wrong, then why is the earth here damp when it hasn't rained in 3 days, and the air is crisp with frost? She indicated a patch of soil near the disturbed undergrowth, where the shadows deepened like pooled ink. The wolves shifted uneasily, their ears flattening, a low growl rumbling in Garen's chest as he bent, sniffing the soil cautiously. His head snapped up, eyes wide, a bitter taste on his tongue. Blood, he admitted, his voice tight with unexpected horror. They planted it here. Fresh pig's blood, camouflaged with pine needles, to draw our attention where they wanted it. Before more words could be exchanged, a sudden, violent rustle erupted from the trees. Rogues burst from the deeper shadows. Fast, snarling, their eyes feral and alight with a hungry malice. But the patrol, though shaken, was ready, steel flashing as they clashed immediately. Dasha didn't fight head-on. She slipped sideways, quick as fire through smoke, her gaze burning as she tracked the leader. He wasn't engaging directly, he was circling, a lean, scarred brute whose eyes were fixed not on the clashing wolves, but on Rhys, the most exposed and vulnerable of the group. Fighting a distraction, the rogue leader wasn't aiming to win the brawl, he was aiming for a specific, crippling strike. He wanted to test their defense, not just break it. Her fox mind calculated, triangulating the rogue leader's path, sensing his killing intent like a cold wind. Her voice sliced through the chaos, sharp and clear. The leader! Behind the dying ash tree! He's targeting Rhys's blind side! Talon arrived then, a blur of muscle and might, drawn by the scent of battle and Dasha's piercing call. His presence was a storm tearing through the night, a whirlwind of controlled power. He lunged immediately where she pointed, just as the rogue leader, a cruel smirk on his snout, lunged for Rhys's exposed flank. Talon's blade met the rogue's thrust with brutal, ringing precision, deflecting it mere inches from Rhys's ribs. The leader's intended killing blow became a glancing strike, and the force of Talon's parry sent him reeling back, crashing into the ash tree with a choked grunt. The remaining rogues, their leader's calculated attack thwarted, scattered like leaves before a gale, melting back into the shadows they had emerged from. They hadn't fought to the death, they had tested. Silence settled again, broken only by ragged breaths and the drip of blood from steel, and Rhys's unsteady gasp of relief. The enforcers stared at Dasha, unease prickling in their eyes, tinged now with a grudging awe. Talon straightened, wiping his blade on a patch of grass, his gaze falling on her. It was not a soft look, but it was not the dismissal she had expected either. You saw what my wolves did not, he said, his voice low, gravelly. You remembered what they overlooked. That was not a random attack, it was a probe. A rival is testing our wall. Dasha folded her hands behind her back, her expression unreadable, though a quiet triumph simmered in her silver eyes. I have survived by noticing what others ignore. and by understanding not just what an enemy does, but why they do it. A flicker crossed his features, something almost like amusement, almost like respect. "Little fox," he murmured, the title curling on his tongue like it belonged there. A strange blend of dismissal and acknowledgement. The enforcers shifted uneasily at the pet name. None had heard their alpha speak so to anyone before, least of all a human. Dasha inclined her head slightly, her silver eyes catching the moonlight, glinting. "It seems even wolves benefit from shadows sometimes." Talon said nothing more, but his silence carried weight. He had heard her, he had seen her, and for the first time, he acknowledged, grudgingly, inevitably, that she was not just a stray in his care, or a nuisance to be tolerated. She was a weapon, waiting to be sharpened. It should have been a victory, a shared understanding, but as he turned and walked away, two amigas, sleek and eager, slipped into his shadow, vying for his notice, their whispers like soft, possessive purrs. Dasha turned her gaze aside, though the fox in her wanted to laugh. They are probing his weaknesses too, she thought, a cold certainty settling in her. Power is sharpest when it cuts alone, but he dulls his edge with flesh. The night had many predators, and some wore familiar faces. The training yard was empty, a skeletal landscape under the stark, silver bite of moonlight. The air hung with the crisp chill of late autumn, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. Dasha had lingered behind, the cold seeping into her cloak, though it didn't touch the restless hum of her kitsune mind. Her fingers traced the rough, splintered wood of the sparring posts, worn smooth in places by countless fights. She replayed every move of the day's patrol, every subtle glance from pack members, every half-whispered word. The wolves treated her like a puzzle they hadn't solved, a foreign scent in their familiar den. She let them. It was safer that way. A sound behind her, not the whisper of wind, but a deliberate crunch of gravel. Then the heavy thud of a boot. A presence, thick and sour, too close for comfort. "Thought I'd find you here," a voice grated, heavy with contempt. It was one of the Omegas, the same one who had sneered at her in the hall earlier that day. Her jealousy, a thing both brittle and burning, cracked her voice into venom. "Always lurking, aren't you, Stray? Like a shadow, trying to steal what isn't yours. You think you're clever, don't you? You think you've tricked him. But alphas don't keep orphans. Not really. They use them. He'll use you. A pretty little plaything. And when he's done, you'll be nothing again. Less than nothing." Dasha turned slowly, her posture calm, almost languid. Her gaze, usually guarded, seemed to deepen under the moonlight, reflecting the silver. Her voice was as soft as velvet over steel, the words precisely chosen. "You mistake silence for weakness." "That's a dangerous assumption to make," the Omega snarled, her anger untempered by Dasha's quiet control. She stepped closer, hands balled into tight fists, knuckles white. The air around her vibrated with raw aggression. "You'll learn your place, Stray. You'll learn it tonight." For a heartbeat, the threat coiled too close, too physical. The Omega's eyes, hot with fury, narrowed on Dasha, and then a cold hand clamped around Dasha's arm, fingers digging in with startling strength, yanking her forward. The sudden, brutal contact jolted Dasha. Her fox mind flared, instincts boiling up, bypassing reason. A sudden, internal combustion, a spark of pure will, not quite contained. Her silver eyes lit unnaturally bright, and with the smallest, involuntary gasp she couldn't contain, a shimmer of brilliant, ethereal blue fire, no bigger than a hummingbird, slipped from between her trembling fingers. It pulsed, momentarily illuminating the Omega's shocked face, then dissipated into a faint wisp of smoke, leaving the acrid scent of ozone hanging in the frigid air. The Omega froze, her grip loosening, eyes wide as saucers, her face blanching to an ashen grey in the moonlight. What was that?" The question was a terrified whisper, a desperate plea for understanding against an impossible sight. A new voice, low and sharp, cut the night in half. It was a sound that seemed to absorb all other noise, leaving only its resonant, commanding echo. Enough! Talon stood at the edge of the yard, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness of the forest line. His arms were folded across his chest, his stance deceptively casual, yet his presence filled the space, a palpable weight like thunderclouds gathering. He hadn't been there a moment ago, or perhaps Dasha had been too wrapped in hiding herself, too focused on the immediate threat, to notice the Alpha's silent approach. The Omega stumbled back, shoulders hunched, her head bowing so quickly her chin nearly hit her chest. Alpha Talon, she was provoking me. Disrespecting the pack, I assure you, sir, nothing more. She cast a panicked, darting glance at Dasha, then scurried away, a desperate, scrambling retreat into the deeper shadows, her heavy boots crunching loudly on the gravel before fading into silence. Dasha remained, back ramrod straight, her facial mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. Her hands slowly, deliberately, folded into the concealing sleeves of her cloak, hiding the faint wisp of smoke that curled away from her fingertips as the foxfire died completely. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against bone, but her breath, though shallow, slowed into a rhythm of composure. She felt raw, exposed, the lingering heat of the foxfire a ghost sensation on her skin. Talon didn't move for a long moment. His gaze, dark, steady, and too sharp to have missed a single detail of the confrontation, held her in place more firmly than any physical chains. He breathed in deeply, the scent of ozone and something subtly, unnaturally sweet still clinging to the cold air. "You have quick reflexes," he said at last, his tone deceptively casual, yet Dasha heard the faint, almost imperceptible question vibrating beneath the words. Dasha's lips curved faintly, a sly but soft tilt. Observation is a survival skill, Alpha. He stepped closer, shadows clinging to him until he stood directly before her, towering and unreadable. The air around him shimmered with subdued power. For once, his gaze wasn't just sharp, it was intent, searching, seeing past the carefully constructed facade she wore. It was the kind of look that stripped away layers, leaving her feeling utterly vulnerable. "You are not what they think you are," Talon murmured, almost to himself, his voice a low rumble. "Not even what you want them to think." Her heart kicked against her ribs, a frantic flutter, but her face betrayed nothing. Kitsune composure, smile like glass, voice like silk. "And you, Alpha, are not as blind as you pretend." A beat of silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. A recognition of clandestine knowledge passing between two beings who saw more than they let on. Then, to her shock, the faintest, almost imperceptible curve touched his mouth. Not warm, not cruel. Something in between, holding a strange, knowing edge. "Little fox." The words weren't mockery this time. They were acclaim, spoken like he'd found something rare, something worth holding on to. A secret, subtle, powerful affirmation. He turned then, his boots crunching softly on the dirt as he strode away, disappearing into the darkness as silently as he had appeared. He left her breathless in the wake of what had just passed, the lingering echo of his words resonating in the cold night. Dasha slowly touched her fingers, remembering the sudden heat, the blue fire that had slipped free. She had made a mistake, a profound, fundamental error. She had revealed too much, shown a truth she had diligently hidden for years, but for the first time, she felt no fear that he had seen, only inevitability. The storm had been brewing for days. Not a tempest of wind and rain, but a chilling atmospheric pressure that settled heavy over the packlands, tasting sharp and metallic on Dasha's tongue. The same way the world smelled before lightning split the sky. The Omega, a she-wolf named Lyra, had been circling her like a starved vulture, whispers spreading in dark corners of the communal den, eyes narrowed with a venom that promised decay. Tonight, the storm finally struck. Dasha walked towards the well, the chill of the late-night air seeping through her simple tunic. Her quiet chores, assigned like any other newcomers, felt less like duties and more like a deliberate exposure. The moonlight, a sliver of polished silver, glinted off the twin buckets in her hands, the water sloshing rhythmically with each step, a soft, intimate sound in the profound quiet of the sleeping village. She never failed to notice details. The way a shadow stretched too long, the sudden, unnatural silence where there should have been the scurry of nocturnal creatures. Her fox mind, keen and ever alert, whispered, "Trap!" It lay across the narrow, moon-dusted path, a snare of thin, almost invisible rope, camouflaged perfectly within the sparse, pale grass. Her silver eyes, sharper than any human's, caught the faintest glint, a microscopic disturbance in the moonlight, just before her foot would have snared it. Had she stumbled, the heavy buckets would have tipped, their contents drenching her before she went sprawling into the ditch, a jagged moor of loose stones and thorned brambles waiting below. She paused, the sloshing of water in her buckets the only sound, her gaze sweeping the dark perimeter. The Omega stood just beyond the tree line, a form swallowed by the deeper shadows, half hidden but not enough to truly be unseen, waiting, watching. The faint scent of her smug satisfaction drifted on the crisp air. Dasha didn't falter. She did what Kitsune always did. She played the game. With a whisper-soft sigh, she let her left foot nudge the rope, a performance of clumsiness. The impact, barely perceptible, sent a tremor up her leg. One of the buckets tipped, not completely, but enough for a gasp of water to spill onto the dirt, wetting the ground in a dark, spreading stain. She straightened slowly, as though nothing untoward had happened, the subtle shift in her weight just enough to make her appear off balance. Her eyes lifted, silver bright and utterly devoid of surprise, locking onto the Omegas. The other woman pushed off the thick trunk of an ancient oak, stepping out into the open with a false sweetness coating her words, a brittle sugar meant to conceal venom. "Careful, stray. You'll make a fool of yourself before you've even earned a place." Her voice was a low purr, designed to carry just far enough. Dasha tilted her head, a familiar fox-like gesture, her voice calm and unhurried, a gentle counterpoint to Lyra's sharp mockery. Funny thing about fools, they usually laugh the loudest at their own jokes. A ripple of attention stirred the night. It began with rustles from the nearest cabins, a quiet creak of wood, then the soft padding of paws as wolves, drawn by the distinct scent of confrontation, emerged from their homes. Their eyes, shadowed and curious, caught the moonlight, reflecting tiny pinpricks of light, whispers carried like sparks through dry grass, a low, collective hum building in the clearing. The Omega stepped closer, her voice growing louder, desperate for the crowd she was now drawing. "She doesn't belong here. She's weak. Look at her. Can't even carry water without tripping over her own feet." Her gaze raked over Dasha, heavy with contempt. Dasha let her gaze drop, not to the spilled water, but to the rope, silver eyes glinting, as she crouched with a deliberate slowness. Her fingers, nimble and precise, found the thin cord, barely visible against the dark earth. With an elegant, unhurried motion, she lifted it, her wrist turning so the nearly invisible strand caught the moonlight, revealing its sinister presence to the growing circle of onlookers. She held the evidence up for all to see, a silent accusation dangling in the air. "And yet," she said, her voice soft, almost a murmur, yet it cut through the murmurs of the pack with uncanny clarity. "Wolves don't set traps for their own, do they?" A collective gasp, louder this time, circled the gathering. The whispers died. The Omega's smirk faltered, her skin paling to the colour of wet ash as the pack's eyes, once curious, now turned on her with a chilling, united accusation. Dasha rose, the thin rope still dangling from her fingers like a snare exposed in broad daylight, its purpose undeniable. She smiled. Not cruel, but sharp. The kind of smile that cut deeper than claws, yet lacked any discernible malice. "Strange, isn't it? You call me weak, but somehow you needed this," the Omega sputtered, her carefully constructed bravado cracking, her voice raw with rage. "You think you're clever?" The air itself shifted. Talon was there, silent until now. His arrival was less an entrance and more a seismic event. His presence slammed into the circle with the absolute weight of a storm breaking, a palpable force that made every wolf in the clearing stiffen. His gaze, dark and lethal, cut through Lyra like a honed blade, and the last of the murmurs died instantly, replaced by a suffocating silence where only the distant hoot of an owl dared break the stillness. His voice was low, dangerous, a rumble in the chest that made the wolves' spines stiffen and their hackles want to rise, though they were disciplined enough not to. Enough. The Omega flinched, her shoulders hunching, but he didn't give her time to speak, to offer a defense that would be pointless. "You dishonor this pack with your petty games, Omega." His eyes were black fire, burning holes in the night, his tone iron, each word a hammer blow. "This ends now. You will not touch her. You will not speak her name. Fail me again, and you will beg for exile before I grant it." The Omega's knees hit the dirt with a soft thud, her bravado stripped clean, her face a mask of utter humiliation. "Alpha, I." "Go!" The single word cracked like thunder, echoing through the stunned silence. It brooked no argument, no plea. She scrambled away, head bowed, her retreat a shameful crawl, her utter humiliation complete before every watching eye. Silence lingered, heavy and charged, until Talon turned his gaze to Dasha. For a heartbeat, his intense focus softened. Not much, but enough for her kitsune mind to see it. A subtle shift in the hard line of his jaw, a flicker in his dark eyes. He didn't scold her, didn't accuse. He only said, his voice now a low growl, "You play dangerous games, little fox." Her lips curved, that sly, knowing smile once more. Games are only dangerous when you don't know the rules. For a moment, Talon simply watched her, something unreadable flickering deep within his dark eyes. A spark of challenge, perhaps, or something akin to grudging admiration. Then he turned, his voice carrying across the still-gathered pack with renewed authority. "Back to your duties. All of you." The pack scattered, the sharp scent of tension giving way to the bustling re-establishment of order, whispers buzzing like hornets in their wake. But in the center of it all, Dasha stood still, the thin rope still dangling from her hand like a trophy, and felt the ground shift beneath her. She hadn't just defended herself. She'd drawn the Alpha's shield around her without ever asking, and the pack had seen it. Talon had never been a man who lingered. Not on faces, not on fleeting moments, not on beauty that came and went like the seasons. He moved with the precision of a predator, taking what he wanted, ruling what was his, and discarding what did not serve. That was the way of an Alpha who feared nothing, whose appetites were sharp and easily sated. He'd never had cause to question a desire, let alone wrestle with one, but lately, he lingered. Dasha was careful, almost painfully so. She braided her hair tightly, a severe plait that seemed to pull her delicate features taut. She kept her tunics plain, simple linen and rough-spun, and her eyes lowered in public, a master of self-effacement. She tried to disappear into the routine of the pack, scrubbing floors, mending torn hides, serving meals with a quiet diligence that grated on him. And yet, no matter how much she pressed herself down, how effectively she tried to become a shadow, he saw her. He always saw her. It gnawed at him, a raw, inconvenient ache beneath his ribs. Tonight, the great hall was loud with voices and clattering plates, the boisterous energy of wolves drinking and laughing after a successful hunt. The hearth fire, a roaring beast of oak and pine, threw gold across faces, making shadows dance like hungry phantoms on the rough stone walls. Talon sat at the head of the long oak table, a goblet of dark ale clutched almost forgotten in his hand, his eyes fixed where they should not be. He told himself he was merely observing, measuring her against the others, assessing her contribution to the pack, but the lie was thin, even to his ears. Dasha moved through the chaotic symphony of the hall with a quiet grace that was both unsettling and captivating. Her steps were soft as smoke, almost unheard beneath the roar, but her presence cut through the din like a single, clear note. She carried a heavy clay pitcher, refilling goblets, her movements economical, fluid, a blade in silk. He saw the firelight catch on the curve of her wrist, the subtle flecks of muscle as she poured. And then, as she straightened, when the firelight hit her eyes, they flashed, silver and bright like struck steel, pulling at him with an invisible, unbreakable thread. Something deep inside him shivered, a seismic shift he hadn't known he was capable of feeling. "You'll know when the one truly holds your gaze, brother," Andre's voice echoed in his memory, mocking its warmth. "You'll hate it, because it will strip you bare and lay your soul at your feet." Talon's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his sharp jawline. He forced his eyes away, tearing them from Dasha, grabbing his goblet, and draining it in a single, desperate swallow. The ale was bitter, but it did little to douse the burgeoning heat within him. But the moment he set the empty vessel down with a sharp clink, his gaze betrayed him again, snapping back to her like a steel trap. The Omega sat nearby, painted in silks the color of spilled wine and heavy with cloying perfume. Her laughter too loud, too high, trying to draw his attention. Once, it would have worked. Once, he would have answered the invitation with careless ease, a flick of his wrist. But now her laughter grated, hollow and sharp, scratching against the inconvenient awe that gripped him. The heavy scent of her perfume turned his stomach, because across the table, Dasha leaned slightly forward, listening to a young packmate tell some exaggerated tale of the hunt. She didn't laugh, not with the Omega's boisterous clamour, but her lips curved in that sly fox smile, subtle and devastating, revealing a hint of something wild and knowing in her eyes. A single stubborn curl of hair, dark as midnight, had slipped free from her braid, falling against her cheek. She brushed it back absently, a simple, unconscious gesture, not even knowing how it made her look, untamed, vulnerable, utterly breathtaking. And Talon's gut clenched, a hot, tight knot of something he refused to name. He pushed back from the table abruptly, the bench scraping across the stone floor with a shrill shriek that cut through the hall's jovial noise. The very air seemed to crackle and still. Conversations faltered, then died. His beater, Torvin, a man of quiet strength and unwavering loyalty, glanced up, brows raised in question. "Alpha?" Torvin's voice was low, careful. Talon's voice was curt, a low growl that cut off the lingering weight in the room, making even the fire seem to dim. "Enough for tonight. The hunt is done. Go rest." It was a command, not a suggestion, laced with a tension that made every wolf in the hall shift uneasily. The pack hesitated, sensing the raw edge in his tone, then obeyed, dispersing in low murmurs, their steps hushed as they filed out. Only when the hall thinned, when the last of the laughter had died and the clatter of plates subsided, did Talon realize the extent of his mistake, how sudden his command had been, how tightly his hand still clenched the goblet he'd long since drained. His knuckles were white with strain. Dasha was still there, a lone figure in the dimming hall, quietly stacking plates on a tray. Her silver eyes, no longer reflecting the firelight but gleaming with the pale luminescence of the moon filtering through the high windows, caught him like a thread snagged in cloth. She didn't speak, she didn't flinch, but she didn't look away, either. There was a challenge in her stillness, a quiet resilience that defied his alpha authority. That thread pulled taut in his chest, so taut he could almost hear his control audibly creak. He broke it first. With a sharp, controlled pivot, Talon turned his back on her and strode out into the night air. The cool wind hit him, sharp and bracing, but it didn't quench the fire coiling and roaring beneath his skin, the inconvenient awe that threatened to consume him. His beta caught up with him on the steps, his presence a solid anchor in the swirling chaos of Talon's mind. You're restless, Torvin observed, his tone flat, knowing. Mind your tongue, Torvin, Talon snapped, the words a low snarl, more beast than man. Torvin held his gaze evenly, unblinking. She unsettles you. Talon's fists flexed, the urge to strike something, anything, a raw impulse. She is nothing but a stray girl, a servant. She'll learn her place. The words rang hollow, even to him, a desperate lie, echoing in the vast silence of his own certainty. Because he had seen the way the firelight kissed her face, the way her subtle smile had punched a hole through his granite composure, and for the first time in his life, Talon felt like he was the one in danger, standing on the precipice of something he utterly, fiercely, did not want. Behind him, the heavy hall door creaked, a soft, protesting groan of ancient wood, as Dasha stepped into the night, with a stack of plates balanced easily in her arms. Her head was still downcast, but the moonlight caught the silver flash of her eyes as she passed him. She moved with the quiet grace of smoke, a whisper of motion, not sparing him a word, not betraying any awareness of his turmoil. But Talon turned his head just enough to catch the faint scent that followed her. Wild, elusive, like rain on dry earth and crushed pine needles, utterly and completely not wolf. And it burned in his lungs like a desire he didn't want, a hunger that threatened to strip him bare. A few nights later, the storm finally broke. The night was thick with rain, a suffocating blanket pressing down on the compound. It had been building for hours, a gathering squall that started as a restless whisper through the eaves, now a mournful howl that clawed at the stable doors. Thunder grumbled low over the mountains, a distant, menacing promise, rattling shutters in the main house and drumming a relentless tattoo on the rooftops of the pack's sprawling compound. Most had taken shelter, drawn close to hearth and kin, but Dasha's path had been drawn out into the storm, lured here by hands she did not trust, their whispers slicked like oil. The air in the stables was heavy, a damp canvas of hay scent and wet earth, overlaid with the sharp tang of rain-driven wind that snaked through every crack and crevice. Hoof snorts and soft whickers came from the stalls, the horses restless, sensing the charged atmosphere. Lanterns hung precariously from wooden beams, guttered and flared with every gust that forced its way inside, casting, skittering, uncertain shadows that danced like phantoms. The Omega stood before Dasha, her lips curling like a serpent's, her eyes alight with a cold, cruel satisfaction. She was flanked by two allies, their faces pale and drawn, their postures betraying a nervous apprehension that belied their outward show of support. They had lured Dasha into the stables, the heavy wooden doors slamming shut behind her with a final, echoing thud that sealed off escape. The shadows deepened with the storm's mounting fury, coiling around the figures like reaching fingers. "You don't belong here," the Omega hissed, her voice low and dripping with venom, barely audible above the drumming rain on the roof. "You were nothing in the orphanage, a forgotten shadow in a corner, and you're nothing now. Talon will tire of you." He always does. Dasha's eyes, silver bright, even in the dim shifting light, flicked to each face, calculating, assessing. Her fox mind, sharp and swift, catalogued everything. The slight, unconscious trembling in the hand of the girl holding the lantern, the telltale glint of a knife half hidden at the Omega's waist, the flicker of fear buried deep beneath their practiced cruelty. She inhaled, filling her lungs with the damp air and the acrid scent of their nervous hostility. Calm. She drew another breath, slow and deliberate, as a jagged crack of lightning split the sky outside, momentarily illuminating the stable's interior in stark, fleeting brilliance. "You've rehearsed that," Dasha said softly, her voice cutting sharper and cleaner than any blade, slicing through the tension. "But rehearsed lies sound hollow." The Omega's face tightened, her jaw clenching. She leaned closer, her whisper venomous enough to poison the very air between them. "You think he calls you little fox because he sees you?" she spat, her voice laced with bitter scorn. "No, you're a passing amusement, a stray he'll tame and toss aside. That's all you'll ever be." Dasha stilled. Her braid, usually so neat, loosened almost imperceptibly, a stray strand of dark hair sliding across her cheek as she slowly, deliberately lifted her head. The rhythmic thud of the rain seemed to recede, the restless whickers of the horses fading into the background. The silence in the stable pressed, thick, heavy, and expectant, broken only by the frantic beat of the Omega's own heart. Then the lantern flickered again, not a casual gust, but a deliberate, chilling pulse. Its light warped, shadows stretching too far, bending unnaturally along the stable walls like living things, elongating, twisting into grotesque shapes. The flame sputtered once, twice, then flared brilliant blue, a cold, ethereal foxfire, reflecting in Dasha's eyes until they burned with an inner, argent flame, no longer merely reflecting, but generating light. Her voice, when it came, was no longer soft. It was layered, a chorus echoing through storm and shadow, resonating not just in the air, but in the very bones of those who heard it. You mistake silence for surrender, but I am no one's amusement. The Omega's girls staggered back, their faces draining of colour, clutching at one another as if to anchor themselves against an invisible current. "What? What is that?" one whimpered, her voice thin and reedy. Dasha stepped forward, no longer cowering or plain. The storm outside seemed to hesitate, the thunder's roll momentarily muted, as though it too had caught its breath, sensing a new, formidable presence. Her braid unravelled further, dark hair spilling loose, strands whipping in a wind that wasn't there, yet felt undeniably real. Her eyes, once soft grey, blazed silver, and then silver caught flame, argent fire licking the edges, until they glowed like molten moonlight. "You mistake meekness for weakness," she murmured, her voice layered upon itself, each word a harmony of echoes, a fox choir that slipped beneath the skin, chilling them to the bone. "I watched you. I remembered every glance, every whisper. I let you think I was prey." Her lips curved upward, a smile that was not kind, but cruel as a blade's edge. "But I am no one's prey." The Omega staggered back a step, a gurgle of fear catching in her throat, colour draining from her face as if siphoned away. The room tightened with something unseen, an invisible pressure that pressed on lungs and spine, making breathing a struggle. Then the foxfire came, blooming in Dasha's palm, not red nor gold, but a cold blue flame that devoured the shadows instead of chasing them away, pulling them into its icy depths. It burned, and yet the air frosted, sending shivers down their spines. The Omega's voice cracked like glass, shattering into a desperate gasp. "You're not a wolf." "No." Dasha lifted her hand, the blue flame dancing on her fingertips. The illusion rippled outward, like water disturbed, shadows rising, swelling into towering fox shapes that loomed behind her, vast and terrifying. Each bore tails, 2, then 4, then 9, endless coils of light and fire, whipping through the air, impossible and yet undeniably present. They were not real, a phantom terror, and yet they were, pressing against the mind, bending logic. They made the soul itself tremble, breath hitched in every throat. The horses in their stalls whinnied, stamping their hooves, sensing the unnatural energy. The Omega's allies broke first. One shrieked, a raw, terrified sound, and bolted, slamming into a beam before stumbling through the door. The lantern tumbling from her rigid fingers to the floor, snuffing out in the rainwater, pooling at the threshold. Another dropped to her knees, sobbing, covering her eyes as if that could shut out the impossible terror that pressed from behind her mind, a cold weight on her very consciousness. Only one Omega remained, her knife shaking violently in her grip, a useless defense against such power. Her teeth chattered. Cold sweat ran in rivulets down her neck, despite the freezing air that now filled the stables. "You should put that away," Dasha whispered, her voice velvet, soft, cruel, inevitable, "before it cuts deeper than you intend." The Omega's knuckles whitened on the hilt, the blade wavering toward Dasha's chest. And that was the moment the stable door slammed open, ripped inward by a sudden, powerful gust of wind. Talon filled the frame, the storm at his back, rainwater streaming down his shoulders. His eyes locked not on Dasha, but on the glint of steel aimed at her heart. A low growl rolled from his chest, deeper than thunder. The Omega flinched, the knife slipping from her nerveless fingers to clatter against the stone floor, the sound sharp and despairing against the roar of the storm. His enforcers moved to follow, but stopped, their boots halting in unison, a synchronized ripple of confusion and awe at the sight before them. Dasha stood in the center of the room, foxfire curling around her body like a second skin, every flicker of cold blue flame revealing and concealing her in turns, creating a mesmerizing, terrifying dance of light and shadow. Her 9 tails lashed and coiled like serpents of pure light, their tips crackling with argent fire, illuminating the dust motes in the air. Her eyes, once soft grey, burned molten silver, reflecting nothing and everything. The shadows in the hall bent toward her, not away, as though the storm itself bowed to her will, submitting to her potent presence. Talon froze, locked in place. He should have moved, commanded, ended this chaos before it spiraled further. That was his role. Alpha, law, the steel spine of the pack, but his body refused. His breath stuck in his throat, the sight of her. No longer the stray fox, no longer the quiet watcher in the corner, but a being of impossible power, hit him like a fist to the chest. His heart beat against his ribs, not with fear, but with something sharper, something older, awe, recognition, hunger, deep and primal, for something he hadn't known he lacked. The pack had always feared him, obeyed him, bent beneath his strength. But this was something different. She was no wolf. She was storm, fire, illusion, and truth, all woven together into a breathtaking, terrifying tapestry. And as the Omega cowered, trembling in ruin, Talon found himself walking forward, slow, inexorable, his gaze locked on the girl who was no girl at all. "Little fox," Talon breathed, and this time the words were reverent, not mocking, stripped of all condescension. His voice caught in his throat, roughened, pitched low so only she could taste the immense weight of it. And Dasha, silver gaze burning into him like twin moons, smiled. Talon's gaze locked with hers, a silent, powerful acknowledgement passing between them. The Alpha, who commanded warbands with a glance and brought silence with a single breath, found himself stripped of words. No command rose to his tongue, no order pressed forward. He simply saw her, all of her, standing cloaked in fire and illusion, stormlight bending to her will. He felt the pull of her power, a magnetic force that tugged at his very core. The Omega cracked first. Her knees hit the floor with a dull thud against the damp stone, her knife forgotten, her breath coming in high, broken sobs that echoed pathetically in the charged air. She's a monster. Talon did not look at her, not once. His gaze never wavered from Dasha's molten silver eyes, but his voice rolled through the chamber like thunder, hard and merciless, chilling the Omega to her marrow. No. The word struck like a hammer, low and guttural, final as a death knell, his shoulders squared, his presence filling the space until the very timbers of the stable seemed to bend beneath it. "She is mine," the Omega whimpered, her knife forgotten on the stones, but Talon's voice did not soften. It cut sharper, steel honed on storm. "You dared bring disorder into my house. You raised a blade against what stands under my protection." He took a single step, not toward the cowering Omega, but toward Dasha, as though gravity itself dragged him to her side. Yet his words lashed at the Omega like a scourge. "For that, you will crawl, you will beg, and you will learn your place." The silence that followed was suffocating, thick as smoke. At last, Talon's gaze flicked, not at the girl, but at his beater, A sharp nod, a command that brooked no hesitation. The beta stepped forward, seizing the Omega by the arms as she tried to shrink away. "Lock down," Talon said, his voice a decree that sealed her fate. "She will rot until she remembers who she serves." The Omega was dragged into the shadows, her sobs swallowed by the storm, leaving only Talon, Dasha, and the air between them, charged, unbreakable, inevitable. The rain hammered on the roof, lightning cracked, wind howled. But here, in this chamber, all sound bent beneath him, beneath the crushing weight of his ultimate authority. His enforcers dared not breathe, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. The Omega's body shook uncontrollably, her palms pressed flat to the ground as if trying to melt into it, to disappear. Talon never once broke his gaze from Dasha, his eyes drinking her in, 9 tails unfurled and shimmering, foxfire curling like serpents of light around her. Her presence bending shadow and storm alike to her will. And in that profound silence, something shifted irrevocably. The pack had always obeyed Talon because they feared him. But now, as he stood uncompromising, claiming her with voice and presence, they began to fear her. A new, ancient fear, born of primordial power, took root. Then Dasha moved. Not with violence, but with something deeper, older. A deliberate grace. The foxfire that curled at her fingertips flared again, rising in a soft silver-blue glow. It spilled outward, tendrils of light reaching, wrapping around Talon in threads of pure energy. It didn't burn, it didn't scorch, it simply enfolded, gentle and firm as a caress. 9 tails unfurled behind her, each shimmering with a phantom fire of its own, sweeping forward until they circled him, a living, pulsing cage of light. Not binding, not trapping, shielding. A cocoon of light and illusion that pulsed like a living heartbeat, utterly potent, utterly protective. Talon inhaled sharply, a raw, primal gasp. For the first time in his life, power that was not his own pressed against his skin, not as a challenge, but as a promise. He could feel it in his chest, like warmth sinking beneath his ribs, filling the spaces no battle, no kill, no conquest had ever touched. His wolf strained against it, territorial, growling a deep possessive rumble. But Talon himself, he felt safe, desired, chosen. Cade, his beta, took a hesitant step forward, eyes wide and uncertain, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The enforcers shifted, hands twitching toward weapons, instincts screaming at them to intervene, to protect their alpha from this unknown, unfathomable force. Talon lifted one hand without looking away from her, his attention entirely consumed by Dasha. The gesture was calm, lethal, and absolute. Do not move an inch. And they froze. Even Cade stepped back, his head bowing in submission, the growl dying in his throat. Only then did Talon finally speak, his voice low, rough with emotion, pitched only for her. "You shield me." Her silver eyes softened, a depth of ancient knowing in their gaze, but the foxfire flared brighter around him, strengthening its embrace. "No, Alpha," she murmured, the layered echoes of her voice now, a gentle lullaby for his soul. "I shield us." The words struck him harder than any physical blow. They bypassed his formidable defenses entirely, plunging directly into the guarded core of him. His throat worked, a dry, painful constriction, but no command came, no cutting retort sharp enough to keep his carefully constructed walls intact. They were crumbling, sand beneath a sudden, overwhelming tide. His chest ached with something fierce, something vast and aching, a sensation so profound it defied immediate recognition, let alone a name. It felt like a cavity had been carved out, or perhaps, finally, filled. "Little fox." His voice cracked, raw and unfamiliar, softer than he meant, reverent as a prayer whispered in a forbidden sanctuary. He took a staggering step forward, drawn by an invisible current. "You've always been watching me, haven't you?" Her smile curved, slow and knowing, a dangerous, beautiful thing that promised both solace and destruction. The 9 magnificent tails, still shimmering with an ethereal silver, curled tighter around them both, a silent, binding embrace. Always, she confessed, her voice a soft caress that seemed to echo through the very air. And now, you finally see me. A low hum vibrated through the air as Dasha's brilliant foxfire, which had sculpted the very air around them into impossible landscapes and towering illusions, dimmed, drawing back into her skin like living mercury. The last vestiges of the fantastical scenery melted away, revealing the stark, storm-swept reality of the peak. The 9 tails dissolved not into nothingness, but into a fine, swirling silver mist that kissed the air, carried away on the storm's breath, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and ancient earth. Until only she remained, breathing hard, the damp wind whipping strands of unbound raven hair across her luminous face, her plain, muted clothing now seeming vibrant against her transformed aura. She didn't flinch, didn't bow, didn't even lower her gaze from his. For the first time, she stood wholly herself, stripped of every pretense, every carefully crafted shadow, radiating a quiet, indomitable strength. Talon's chest rose once, a slow, heavy intake of air, as though the sheer, impossible weight of what he'd just witnessed pressed down on him, threatening to crush his very bones. His wolf strained inside, a powerful, primal beast, torn between a possessive hunger that roared for immediate claim and a stunned, almost worshipful silence that had never before been forced upon it. But deeper than either, beneath the layers of instinct and dominance, was something unfamiliar, something raw and utterly exposed. It wasn't the searing heat of being wanted, a sensation he was accustomed to. It wasn't the comforting certainty of being chosen, a validation he often commanded. It was the staggering, unsettling, utterly terrifying sense of being truly, irrevocably seen. Not just observed, but recognized. Stripped bare, not by force, but by a gaze that peeled away layers he hadn't even known he possessed. Every physical scar etched onto his skin from countless battles, every shadow that clung to his past deeds and hidden regrets, every locked-away corner of his soul where his deepest terrors and most vulnerable hopes resided. Her luminous silver eyes had walked through them all, not with judgment, but with an unnerving, absolute acceptance that demanded a response he wasn't prepared to give. Dasha exhaled slowly, the last embers of foxfire dimming to a soft glow deep within her gaze before fading entirely. For once, she did not attempt to tuck herself back into the shadow she had always used as a shield, to hide behind the meek, unassuming persona she had worn for so long. She simply existed, open and vulnerable, yet more powerful than he had ever conceived. And Talon, feared alpha of wolves, the one no one dared challenge, let alone strip bare, knew beyond all doubt, his world, the carefully constructed edifice of his life, had just changed forever. The stable air hung thick and heavy, not just with the scent of damp earth and hay, but with the palpable tension of a dozen wolves facing an unknown. Rain lashed relentlessly against the ancient timber roof, a dull, rhythmic drumming that amplified the silence within. Dasha lifted her hand, not in anger, but with a deliberate, almost ritualistic grace. Instead of striking, she opened her palm. A soft glow sparked, a whisper of blue-white light, born from the very air above her skin. It didn't flicker nervously, it pulsed with an inner calm, dancing like a star plucked from the heavens and held captive. This was foxfire, kitsunebi, and it cast an ethereal sheen on the terrified, wary faces around her. The storm-muted shadows in the corners of the stables seemed to bend toward it, drawn in, transfixed. The air around the light shimmered, carrying a faint, clean scent like ozone after a summer storm. "You fear me because you do not understand me," she said, her voice clear and even, stripped of any aggression, almost kind. It cut through the drumming rain. "You hear the word kitsune and think of trickery, of spirits that steal your breath in the night, of ravenous hunger. But not all foxes are cruel. Not all spirits seek ill. The single flame split, dissolving into smaller, luminous orbs that drifted apart, swirling gently as if caught on an unseen current. The air within the stable thickened with their presence, shimmering with a soft silver light that coated every face, every strand of wet fur, turning the rough-hewn beams into something magical. They hovered like fireflies composed of starlight, their glow casting gentle, shifting patterns across the floor. This is foxfire, Kitsunebi. I can wield it as flame, yes, but also as light. It signals, it guides, it warms. It becomes what the heart commands. I am not a threat, unless one is brought to me. Her silver gaze, luminous with the reflected light, swept the room, pausing on the Omega girl, who stood clutching her chest. Her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and revulsion. She flinched, shrinking back into the cluster of wolves around her. I am Azenko, Dasha continued, her voice gaining a quiet resonation that seemed to settle into the bones of every wolf present. A protector. My kind once guarded shrines, temples, and those who sought truth. We watched over sacred places, ensuring balance, shielding the innocent. Then, before anyone could draw a full breath, before the gasps forming in throats could fully escape, her form rippled. It was like watching water distort, her braid dissolving into a wisp of smoke, her human frame bending inward, collapsing, shrinking with impossible speed. A soft thud echoed on the straw-strewn floor, and where the formidable woman had stood, a tiny shape now sat. A kitten, no larger than a child's palm, with fur as dark as midnight, and silver eyes too bright, too knowing, to belong to any ordinary creature. The constellation of foxfire orbs hovered around her tiny, vulnerable form, making her glow like something born of pure myth. A chorus of gasps, sharp and ragged, filled the stable. One of the Omega's allies whispered a strangled prayer, her fingers digging frantically into the fabric over her heart. Breaths caught, held, as wolves stared, their fear momentarily overridden by sheer, unadulterated wonder. A low, guttural growl rumbled from a few throats, a reflexive territorial challenge quickly stifled by the weight of the moment. The kitten, eyes still burning with argent light, stretched a tiny paw. Then, with another shimmering ripple, her form stretched, reformed, expanded. Muscle and bone rebuilt themselves with silent speed, fur melting into skin, limbs elongating. Dasha stood once more in her human skin, full and statuesque, her hair flowing loose around her shoulders, eyes burning with the same argent fire. She extended her palm, and the last wisp of foxfire, a tiny star shard, folded into her skin with a soft sigh, leaving only a faint echo in the suddenly darker air. You see? She said simply, her voice now edged with a cool steel. I am what I choose to be, light or flame, trickster or protector. You fear what you do not understand. But know this, I will not be your prey. Not now, not ever. The silence that followed was heavy, not just with fear, but a profound, unshakable wonder. Even the rhythmic drumming of the rain seemed to hush at the edges, as if listening, waiting for the next word. Talon finally moved. His jaw flexed, a muscle ticking beneath his skin, and his broad shoulders rolled back, his gaze sweeping over his pack like a storm breaking. For a single heartbeat, his eyes stayed locked on Dasha, the faint silver fire still shimmering, almost imperceptibly, in her irises. Then his voice cut the silence, sharp and resonant as a blade drawn from its sheath, carrying to every corner of the stables, even over the persistent rain. She has shown you her truth, he said, his voice a low growl of command. Not weakness, not deceit, power. Raw, untamed, undeniable power. He took a deliberate step forward, the stormlight glinting off the damp strands of his dark hair, rain still dripping from the tips. Do you not see? This does not diminish us, it strengthens us. What she is, what she carries, will only enhance this pack. Do you doubt an alpha's judgment? Do you doubt what I see before me? Murmurs rippled through the wolves, uncertainty giving way to shifting glances, some still fixed on Dasha, others nervously avoiding Talon's fierce gaze. The Omega whimpered, but her fear was now mixed with a dawning awe. Talon's eyes narrowed, sweeping over them like a predator, assessing a challenge. If you think her power is a threat, then you are blind to what true strength looks like, to what potential lies ready to be unleashed, to what we can become. He lifted a hand, open-palmed, his command unspoken but undeniable, vibrating through the very earth. She is mine. As a mate, she is Luna. The words hung in the air, a thunderclap in the muted stillness. The pack collectively gasped again, a ragged exhalation of disbelief, understanding, and a dawning, terrifying realization. Luna, the Alpha's chosen. The very thought of a kitsune as their Luna, their guiding light, shattered every preconception. Fear warred with an overwhelming sense of the sacred, of destiny. Some wolves dropped their gazes instantly, trembling in submission. Others, still caught between fear and wonder, merely stared, unable to process the magnitude of his claim. Then, Andre, Talon's first beta, stepped forward, his scarred face grim but resolute. His eyes, usually sharp and assessing, held a flicker of the same wonder that had touched the others. He met Talon's gaze, then shifted it to Dasha, acknowledging her. The Alpha speaks true. She has earned her place, not just as a member, but as a leader. She has shown courage and strength beyond measure. I accept her. I stand with her. This pack gains with her at our side, as Luna. His voice was steel, no hint of doubt. Another voice followed, the second beta, Thorn, dropping his head in a show of profound loyalty. As do I. Her spirit is fierce, her heart true. We bow to her as our Luna. One by one, shoulders straightened, heads bowed. Not just in fear, but in recognition, in a reluctant, dawning respect for the power they had witnessed, combined with unwavering loyalty to their Alpha's word. The fear hadn't entirely vanished, but it had yielded to something larger, wonder, and the powerful, ancient instinct of submission to the Alpha's will, especially when that will was backed by such undeniable truth. Talon exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing fractionally. He didn't turn to his wolves again. He didn't need to. His voice, low now, a rumbling caress, was meant only for Dasha. They will follow, he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her face, still luminous from the fading foxfire. Not because I command it, but because they finally see what I see. He took another step, closing the distance between them, and his hand reached out, not to grab, but to gently cup her jaw. His thumb brushing her cheek, a silent promise, a binding claim. My little fox. The night was thick with rain, shadows pooling along the corridors of Talon's stronghold. Most of the pack had retired, though whispers still lingered in the halls after his claim. For the first time in years, their Alpha was being discussed in tones of wonder and fear. Dasha sat by the window of her chamber, silver eyes reflecting the lightning. She didn't startle when Talon entered without knocking. She didn't need to. His presence pressed against her skin before he crossed the threshold. He shut the door quietly, almost too quietly, for a man like him. You should sleep, he said. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of its commanding edge. I should, Dasha murmured, gaze still fixed on the storm. But foxes don't sleep when the world is noisy. A corner of his mouth tugged, always watching, always. He stood for a long moment, silent, as though his body warred with his tongue. Finally, he crossed the room, standing just behind her chair. The storm lit his face in brief flashes, rugged, sharp, but something raw lingered in his eyes. You were right, Talon said at last. his words quieter than the thunder. Dasha turned slightly, one brow raised. About what? I've said so many things you didn't want to hear. His lips almost curved at that. Almost. About fear not being loyalty. About me. Her fox smile flickered. Didn't think you liked mirrors, Alpha. I don't, he exhaled, a heavy, controlled breath. But I can't ignore what I saw today. You stood in the storm and fought back. Not as a wolf, not even as one of them. You fought as yourself. And I put you in danger long before that fight. Dasha turned fully now, silver eyes sharp. Because of her, she said softly. The Omega. Talon's jaw flexed. He nodded once. Because of them. I thought my indulgences were harmless. A release. Nothing more. His voice was harsh, but not with anger, with shame. But my disregard made you a target. They thought you were disposable. They thought my bed gave them power. Dasha tilted her head, fox-like, watching him. And now? His eyes darkened, a storm meeting a silver flame. Now I know it was a weakness, not indulgence. Weakness, and you nearly paid for it. She rose slowly, stepping closer, her bare feet silent against the stone floor. She looked up at him, unflinching. So what will you do, Alpha? For a man who fears nothing, you sound a lot like one confessing. The words seemed to cut and soothe him at once. His hand lifted, hesitated, then dropped again, clenched at his side. You make me regret things I've never regretted in my life, he admitted, voice rough. And worse, you make me want something I don't have words for, something that isn't power, isn't control. Her heart kicked hard in her chest, but she kept her expression smooth, fox calm. Careful, she whispered. You sound almost human. That earned her the faintest, rarest smile, a flicker of warmth breaking through his cold mask. He stepped closer, close enough that the storm's glow made his shadow swallow hers. I've fallen for you, little fox, Talon said, the words like gravel dragged across stone. Not as possession, not as a conquest, but as mine. Equal, more than equal, and I don't know how to be that man. Dasha's lips curved, silver eyes glimmering slyly in the lightning. Lucky for you, foxes are good teachers. The silence after was charged, thunder rolling outside as though the storm itself held its breath. His hand found hers, hesitant, rough fingers brushing delicate knuckles. She could feel his strength there, caged and waiting, and yet it trembled like a boy's first reach. Slowly, cautiously, her other hand lifted, fingertips tracing the line of his forearm. The contact was feather-light, a whisper of silk over steel. Talon's breath caught. Her touch was not demanding, not fire-consuming, but something far more dangerous. It was care. It was love dressed in slyness, soft as dusk, wrapping around him with unbearable gentleness. Dasha! His voice cracked, unmoored. No one had ever undone him with tenderness. Not once. Her 9 tails shimmered behind her, her foxfire dim but radiant, curling around them in arcs of pale blue light. It wasn't for show. It was instinct, her soul reaching for his, cocooning them in a glow that pressed the storm back from the walls. He lowered his forehead to hers, breathing her in, letting her silk-dark hair brush his cheek. For once, the Alpha did not command. He lingered. He waited. And when she tilted her chin, lips parting just slightly, he kissed her, not taking, not claiming, but soft, reverent, almost fragile, a kiss set apart. He had bedded Omegas for release, but he never kissed them. This was different. To him, kissing was an intimacy, and through all his years as Alpha, he had guarded that part of himself, saving it for the one he could not let go. Her hands trembled against him, and he felt her foxfire flare, not in fury, but in devotion. It wrapped them tighter, tails weaving light and shadow, as though the world itself wanted this union sealed. When he finally drew back, his chest was heaving, eyes burning molten on hers. "You've ruined me," he whispered, "and God's help me. I don't ever want to be whole again." The first kiss broke him open. The second burned him alive. Dasha's lips were still soft beneath his, still silken as moonlight, but when her fingers slid up to his jaw, tracing the stubble, daring to cup his face, something snapped inside him. The Alpha, who had always taken, who had always commanded, found himself pulled. Her tails flared bright around them, foxfire curling in ribbons that kissed his skin with phantom heat. He growled low, not in anger but in surrender, deep in his chest as his mouth claimed hers again. Hotter, hungrier. She met him with equal fire, her sly fox's smile melting into a gasp against his lips. "Dasha!" His voice was wrecked, pleading where it had never begged before. "Show me," she whispered, silver eyes molten. "Show me it's more than fear, more than power." He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, her legs curling instinctively around his waist. Every breath between them was fire and storm, every heartbeat too loud, too fast. He carried her through the hall, past the stunned silence of those who had witnessed her foxfire, into the private sanctuary of his chamber. Talon kicked the heavy oak door shut behind them, the resounding thud swallowed by the continued rumble of thunder. His chamber was sparse, masculine, designed for function over comfort. A massive, furs-draped bed dominating the center, a simple stone hearth warm beneath a heavy mantle. But with Dasha in his arms, the space transformed. The air crackled with her foxfire, casting shimmering blue-white light over the rough-hewn walls, making the shadows dance like watchful spirits. Rain lashed against the single, high window, a percussive rhythm to the drum of his heart. He carried her to the bed, not gently setting her down, but collapsing with her, their bodies tangling in a desperate heap. The furs yielded, soft and warm beneath them, creating a primal nest. Her legs, still wrapped around him, tightened, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. Her hands, bold now, raked through his hair, tugged at the collar of his tunic, demanding release. "My fox!" he rasped, his voice a guttural confession against her neck. He breathed in her scent, rain-fresh fur, wild honeysuckle, and something subtly dangerous, unmistakably hers. It was an intoxicating blend that promised both peace and utter chaos. "You burn, only for what I want," she murmured, her words a breathy challenge that stoked the embers into a wildfire. Her silver eyes, luminescent pools in the dim light, held his gaze, unblinking. There was no coyness, no girlish shyness, only the fierce, ancient clarity of a creature who knew her mind and desired him utterly. She was not yielding, she was accepting, inviting. He tore at his clothing, then hers, the heavy fabrics falling away to reveal skin that glowed faintly in the foxfire. His hands, usually so heavy and commanding, were almost reverent as they traced the delicate curve of her ribs, the slender line of her waist. He paused, fingers brushing over the slight swell of her hip, a silent query. "Don't stop," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady, considering the tremor that ran through her body. Her tails, a liquid blue halo behind her, swirled and tightened, a protective and possessive embrace around them both. They were an extension of her spirit, and in their ethereal glow, he saw the depth of her trust and the ferocity of her devotion. He lowered himself slowly, bracing his arms on either side of her, as if afraid to crush her. His mouth met hers again, and this time there was no hesitation. The kiss was fire, needy, consuming, but threaded with a gentleness he hadn't known he possessed. His lips trailed down her jaw, her throat, where her pulse fluttered quickly beneath the heat of his breath. She arched into him, her hands sliding down the solid frame of his thighs, palms pressing against the ridges of muscle and scar, as if learning him by touch alone. Talon devoured her mouth again, a kiss of desperate hunger, of profound revelation. This wasn't just the coupling of Alpha and Omega, it was the joining of two broken halves, shards of power and wildness finding their missing piece. He moved over her, into her, the storm outside mirroring the tumultuous rush of sensation within. He moved slowly at first, as though relearning how to breathe with her. Every shift of his hips, every brush of his hands across her waist or thigh, was worship. She met him in equal measure, not as prey yielding to a predator, but as fire twining with storm, her foxfire sparking brighter, tails flickering and wrapping them, until the Alpha's chamber felt like another world. He had known physical release countless times, a brutal, almost perfunctory act performed to dull the edges of his solitude. But this was unraveling. It was a shattering and a reforging. With every thrust, every shuddering breath, the armored plates around his heart seemed to crack and fall away, exposing the raw, aching core of him. He wasn't taking. He was being taken, body and soul. Dasha, the small, sly fox, was flaying him open with her sharp clarity and her intoxicating tenderness. When her nails grazed his back, he groaned. A deep, broken sound that filled the chamber. "Dasha," he muttered against her skin, half plea, half prayer. "You'll undo me." Her gasps mingled with his growls, a symphony of their shared surrender. Foxfire flared, pulsed, and then spread like a shimmering net across the ceiling, illuminating the room in a dazzling, otherworldly blue. It was a witness to their union, a sacred light affirming the impossible bond. When it was over, when the tremors had subsided and the storm outside had begun to recede into a soft, steady patter, Talon collapsed, burying his face in the curve of her neck. His breath came ragged, his body aching, yet for the first time in his life, he felt unburdened. Her scent, warm, wild, and unmistakably hers, wrapped around him like a vow. Her tails, still faintly glowing, had settled around them like a protective cocoon, soft and warm. She stroked his hair, her fingers feather-light, almost playful. "Well, Alpha," Dasha murmured, her voice husky with satisfaction. "Did I teach you something?" He shifted, lifting his head to look at her, his eyes still burning with the afterglow. A rare, unguarded smile touched his lips. "You tore down my walls, little fox. You set a fire in my soul." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, lingering on her lips. "And you showed me what it truly means to be bound." She chuckled, a soft, intimate sound. "Good. Now, perhaps you understand that some loyalties are not given through fear, but earned through love." He pulled her closer, a possessive, yet infinitely tender gesture. "My heart," he whispered against her hair, the word now heavy with devotion instead of demand. The rain outside tapered to a whisper, and in the blessed silence of his chamber, cradled in the soft, ancient light of her foxfire, Talon finally knew peace. He had been powerful, feared, and alone. Now, he was simply hers, and it was everything. The storm still clung to the air like a damp shroud, its chill seeping into the pack hall, mingling with torch smoke and the smell of wet earth tracked in on boots. Water dripped from the beams into waiting buckets, the sound keeping time with the uneasy shifting of wolves. All eyes darted from the dais where Talon stood to the silver-haired figure at his side. "Pack!" Talon said, his voice low but unyielding. "You've seen enough to whisper. Some of you saw her fire, some saw her fox. You'll see the truth now. This is Dasha, Kitsune. Protect her, not prey. She is mine, not as conquest, but as mate, as Luna." A ripple moved through the hall, hushed but restless. "Luna?" Borin's growl broke the silence. "She is no wolf. She is a curse on our blood." Before Talon could answer, another voice rang out. Andre's. He had arrived hours earlier, summoned by Talon, and now stood at his brother's side. His presence was a blade in the room, lean but unshakable. "I came because I doubted," Andre admitted, gaze cutting through the crowd. "I thought my brother was mad. But I saw her power myself. Foxfire, Ninetails, a being out of legend. If Talon weren't my brother, I would fear him with her at his side." And you should too. Not in shame, but in awe. She is Luna. He turned to Dasha, inclining his head. Welcome to the family. Dasha dipped her chin, her mouth tilting slyly. A ribbon of foxfire spun from her hand, twining around Andre's arm. The crowd gasped as the pale blue light curled like a living thing. Andre stiffened, then barked a startled laugh, lifting his hand to let the fire coil around his fingers. I love this, brother, he said, grinning wide and without mockery. She is fire. I would rather stand beside than face as an enemy. The foxfire winked out, leaving warmth in its wake. Dasha's silver eyes gleamed as murmurs rose again, sharper this time. From the rear, Alara stepped forward, her voice cold. A fox as Luna? This defies our ways. Wolves are guided by wolves, not trickster spirits. Dasha's fingers glowed faintly, but her voice carried sharper than fire. Your ways have brought fear, not strength. My loyalty is to your Alpha. My fire will guard this pack as surely as his teeth. If you cannot see that, perhaps it is not me you doubt, but him. Talon's snarl cut through the hall, final and thunderous. She is Luna. Anyone who questions it will answer to me. The silence that followed was heavy, taut as a bowstring. Heads dipped, some in respect, others in reluctant submission. Then one of the younger wolves staggered forward, a cut on his arm still bleeding from the scuffle outside the walls earlier that day. He'd hidden it, ashamed to show weakness before the others. Dasha's silver gaze caught the way he cradled it, the pain etched in his breath. Without a word, she lifted her hand, and foxfire shimmered. Soft as starlight, it threaded over the wound, not burning, not biting, but sealing the flesh clean. The boy gasped, flexing his hand as though testing a miracle. A murmur rippled through the hall, not of fear this time, but of wonder. She heals, someone whispered. She protects, another added. Even the doubters stood quiet, the hard edge of their scorn dulled by awe. Talon's voice rang out, steady and proud. This is what she brings, not just fire for war, not just wit for counsel. She brings strength where we are weak, and hope where we have forgotten it. For the first time that night, heads bowed not in reluctance, but in reverence. The hall did not feel fractured now, but changed. Different, uncertain, yet undeniably stronger. Later, when the wolves dispersed, it was not with muttered doubts alone, but with the memory of Foxfire's glow lingering in their eyes. The hall emptied by degrees. Boots on stone, voices hushed, lanterns dimmed one by one, until silence settled over the compound like a cloak. Not heavy this time, but close and protective, like the promise of a new dawn. In her small room, Dasha sat with foxfire flickering faintly at her fingertips, the weight of 100 eyes still lingering on her skin. The door opened without a knock. Heavy steps, steady as thunder, crossed the threshold. Talon filled the frame, his shadow vast in the lamplight. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. Dasha's chin lifted, silver eyes meeting his. Then where should I be? He crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping just before her. His hand reached down, not to command, but to offer. With me, always, her breath caught. Your chamber, not mine, he corrected, voice low, roughened by something that stripped him bare. Ours. Your place isn't apart anymore. It's here. Beside me. For good. For the first time, she hesitated. Not out of fear, but because the weight of it was real, unshakable. His words weren't heat or impulse, they were stones laid into the foundation. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. Her foxfire flared at the touch, wrapping around their joined fingers in a soft glow. And if I take it, she asked softly, if I claim this place? Talon's eyes darkened, but his mouth curved. Not in hunger, not in dominance, but in something dangerously close to peace. Then you claim me, little fox, all of me. Her lips curved, sly and tender all at once. I thought I already had, He bent then, not rushing, not seizing, but lowering his head until their foreheads touched. His voice was barely a breath against her skin. "You did, and it undid me!" She smiled against him, her foxfire curling around them like a cocoon of silver flame. "Good. Now you know how it feels." And as he lifted her into his arms and carried her back through the halls, no storm followed, only quiet and the warmth of belonging. In his chamber, their chamber now, the fire burned low. They didn't need words anymore, but they gave them anyway. Slow, tender confessions, wrapped in kisses, softer than shadows. For the Alpha feared by all, and the fox who had undone him had found something no pack law could name, something that began and ended with two hearts, side by side. That's the end of this tale, but in the world of the supernatural, there's always another shadow waiting. Thank you for staying with me through every twist, turn, and heartbeat. If you enjoyed the ride, there's more waiting for you. Take a look at the other audiobooks on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more magic, monsters, and stories that go bump in the night. Until next time, stay curious and brave, and never stop listening.